These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are Raycon earbuds. Stay at home with better sound. More info at buyraycon.com/Tom. Omega XL, which according to clinical research helps joints. More info at omegaxl.com/Tom. CB Distillery, CBD for sleeping. More info at cbdistillery.com, code TOM. The Clean Phone Pro, phone sanitizer and charger. More info at thenewdealshop.com. Keeps hair loss treatment. More info at keeps.com/Tom. And Teeth, Smarter Pet Dental Health. For more info, teeth.com, code TOM.
We say fight back!
We're reading today from the American Revolution of 1800 by Dan Sisson. He wrote the book 40 years ago. Recently, I went through, Dan and I actually went through, I wrote a foreword and an afterword to it and did some substantial editing on the book. And it's something you need to read. This is from the introduction, which I wrote. It is rare when a book about our early republic is relevant 40 years after it was originally published. It is rarer still when that book provides insight into national problems we refuse to solve 2 centuries later. You are therefore holding in your hands or reading on your pad or computer one of the most important books you will ever encounter. Here is why. Unlike other histories of this era, this book is written from a revolutionary perspective, much like Jefferson's generation viewed the world. The American Revolution of 1800 was not just about an election. It was about the life and death struggle for power between democratic-republican principles and oligarchic plutocratic values based on corruption. In short, this book, by implication, is about the identical crisis America faces today. The author's unique analysis is based on the idea of faction controlling party and how both undermine constitutional government. In an age where modern parties and the factions that control them have paralyzed our government, this book validates the politics of the founders. In still another contribution, the book demonstrates how preserving revolutionary ideas within our culture depends on understanding the classical tradition. The ability to recognize a demagogue is rooted deeply in the role Caesar played in destroying the Republic of ancient Rome. That fear of a Caesar inspired Jefferson and others to organize citizens against the Federalists, thereby completely contradicting the political rules of their time. This book, above all, presents a profoundly positive view of Jefferson and his creativity in the midst of crisis. It celebrates his gift 24 years after he wrote the Declaration of Independence and proves he never abandoned his principles or his revolutionary vision for America's future. Ironically, it's become a cliche in political and economic circles that while we love Thomas Jefferson, we live in a country largely run by Alexander Hamilton's policies and John Adams's politics. This may have been more true of the roughly 200 years before the contemporary free trade era, beginning in the 1970s under Richard Nixon and exploding in the mid-1990s when Bill Clinton signed NAFTA. Alexander Hamilton must be rolling over in his grave. Nevertheless, we have become a mercantilist nation dominated by banks and big industries as Hamilton envisioned. It is true that there were huge differences between Hamilton and Jefferson, particularly in their visions for the future of America and its economy. And those divisions tend to dominate interpretations of our political discussion when we reference the era of our first few presidents. But a much larger and more dramatic battle of worldviews played out in the late 1790s between President John Adams and Vice President Thomas Jefferson, leading directly to what is arguably the most transformational presidential election in the history of the United States, the election of 1800. In Other Books and Places, both Dan Sisson and I have written at some length about the differences between these two men and their respective visions of America. Adams relished throwing newspapers editors in prison and demanded that when he and his wife visited a town, the local militia come out to fire their cannons and salute of him and shout, "God save President Adams." Jefferson was so horrified by Adams's Alien and Sedition Acts that he left town the day they were signed into law, and as president often wore simple homespun garments. He was known to answer the front door of the White House in his bathrobe, and more than one visitor mistook him for a servant. As president, Jefferson literally acted out his egalitarian visions of America. In my book, The Crash of 2016, The Plot to Destroy America and What We Can Do to Stop It, I describe Jefferson's concern over aristocracy in American politics. On October 28, 1813, in a letter to his old rival John Adams, Jefferson commented on his distrust of America's growing wealthy elite, naming in particular the Senate, which was not then democratically elected by the people. Referring to the, quote, cabal in the Senate of the United States, end quote, Jefferson wrote, "You, John Adams, think it best to put the pseudo-aristoi into a separate chamber of legislation, the Senate, where they may be hindered from doing their mischief by their coordinate branches, and where also they may be a protection to wealth against the agrarian and plundering enterprises of the majority of the people." Then Jefferson countered in the letter, writing, "I do not believe them, the Senate, necessary to protect the wealthy, because enough of them will find their way into every branch of the legislation to protect themselves." Instead, Jefferson wrote, "I think the best remedy is exactly that provided by all our constitutions, to leave to the citizens the free election. In general, they will elect the really good and wise. In some instances, wealth may corrupt and birth blind them, but not in sufficient degree to endanger society." And in a final warning about the largely Federalist cabal in the Senate, and these would be the conservatives of their time, Jefferson wrote, quote, "The artificial aristocracy is a mischievous ingredient in government, and provision should be made to prevent its ascendancy. I think that to give them power in order to prevent them from doing mischief is arming them for it, and increasing instead of remedying the evil." In a 1786 letter to George Washington, Jefferson gave his most explicit warning about this threat of a military allied with the plutocracy within, and advocated for unwavering vigilance against it. Quote, "Though the day may be at some distance, beyond the reach of our lives perhaps, yet it will certainly come, when a single fiber left of this institution will produce an hereditary aristocracy which will change the form of our governments from the best to the worst in the world."
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Well, greetings, my friends, patriots, lovers of democracy, truth and justice, believers in peace, freedom, and the American way. Thom Hartmann here with you. By the way, I've got a couple of events coming up. These are just, free drop-in anytime you want. You do have to register. Powell's is doing a virtual bookstore event. I'm having a conversation with David Corton. This is about my new book, which is out in the next few weeks. It's called The Hidden History of Monopolies, How Big Business Destroyed the American Dream. And the Powell's event will be on the 25th of this month of August, and the Town Hall Seattle event will be on September 4th. And you can get more information about that over at thomhartmann.com. Just an FYI about what I'm up to as we continue. What Trump is up to on Friday is further gutting the post office. Louis DeJoy, who is the $2 million donor to the Trump campaign that Trump put in charge of the post office, on Friday did what is being referred to as the Friday Night Massacre. He removed 2 senior executives and displaced 23 top postal executives. In all, basically a 33-person reorganization of the senior management of the post office. Why? Well, in all probability, it appears to mess with our election and to set the post office up for privatization, for Federal Express to come in or some other company and buy it. But probably the biggest news over the weekend is that while Trump was hanging out with millionaires and billionaires at his country club where you pay $350,000 to join, And they all, stood there and syncopatically applauded him. And, most not even wearing masks at one point, which is just bizarre. He said that he was signing 4 executive orders. Now, that's a lie. He signed 1 executive order and 3 things called memorandums. I got this email from the Trump campaign. The president just signed 4 executive orders. Well, like I said, that's a lie. He signed 1 executive order. That 1 executive order we'll get to in a minute, but it doesn't do anything. But we'll go through these. Anyhow, it says the president just did this. And then bullet points. This is in the email that Trump sent out to tens of millions of people. Extending unemployment benefits, preventing evictions, extending student loan relief, and payroll tax cuts. Now, these are all lies. These are all just plain old flat out lies because, we've got a grifter in the White House who has lied, 20 some odd thousand times since he came into office. And these are stunning lies. I would bet almost anything if I were a betting man, and occasionally I am, mostly in casinos, but and even there very rarely. But I would bet almost anything that Mark Meadows is behind this. Mark Meadows is the guy who owes his career to Charles Koch and his network of people. He was the chair of the Tea Party caucus in the House of Representatives. Virtually all of the members of the Tea Party caucus, in a large chunk, probably the large majority of the Republican Party overall, both at the state and federal levels around the country, owe their careers to Charles Koch and his network. But Mark Meadows in particular. And that, if Trump sat down with Pelosi and Schumer and McConnell, that they would probably work something out, because Trump wants a deal. But Mark Meadows is playing this hardball because Trump put Meadows in charge of it, or Meadows put himself in. He's the president's chief of staff right now. And basically, the Democrats came in and said, we want $3 trillion. That'll be enough to fund $600 a month until the end of the year. It'll be enough to offer more money to small businesses who are struggling. It will accomplish a substantial number of things, actually. It would extend the unemployment coverage of $600 a week all the way to the end of the year. Instead, the Republicans are proposing to put into place a huge tax break for 43,000 millionaires. The HEROES Act, the Democrats, it repeals a $135 billion millionaire giveaway. On the unemployment insurance, the Democrats were proposing $600 a week. This is in the $3 trillion bill. The Republicans' $1 trillion bill rebuttal was $200 a week. The Democrats are proposing $900 billion, almost $1 trillion, to give to state and local governments because their tax revenues have collapsed. You've got states that are on the verge of bankruptcy. The Republicans, no money. No money for state and local. We don't care if fire departments go broke. The Democrats were proposing $117 billion in additional support for Medicaid so that, low-income people who get sick with coronavirus could get treated. The Republicans said no money for Medicaid. The Democrats were proposing $13 an hour minimum wage for frontline workers, for so-called essential workers, as hazard pay, basically. The Republicans said no to the $13 an hour, and instead they want corporate immunity from coronavirus lawsuits. The Democrats proposed a 12-month moratorium on evictions. The Republicans said no moratorium. And by the way, this preventing evictions in Trump's so-called executive order, that's actually the only one that is an executive order. And it doesn't prevent evictions. It orders the Department of Health or Housing and Urban Development, HUD, and which is part of HHS, I believe. It basically orders them to look into whether it's possible to do this. So you can still get evicted today, anywhere in the country. The Democrats in their HEROES Act proposed a $3.6 billion grant for election assistance so that states can print more mail-in ballots and things. The Republicans, no, not a penny to the states for printing ballots and for election assistance. And the Democrats, in their HEROES Act said, we want to protect Social Security and Medicare, so there will be no changes in those programs. The Republicans want to gut Social Security and Medicare in their so-called HEALS Act. So, let's just go through this. Trump says he's going to extend unemployment benefits. He wants to give everybody in the country who's unemployed $300, and the state will match that with $100, so everybody gets a total of $400. Well, how does he do that? He doesn't have the authority to appropriate money and give it to people. It turns out that he's doing it the same way he's funding his wall down in Texas. Funding the wall in Texas, he took $5 billion out of the Defense Department and said, that wall is defense, so we're going to spend that down on the southern border. Well, in this case, he says we're going to, the $300 per person per week. He said, we're going to take that out of the FEMA budget. The FEMA budget has a $44 billion surplus right now, which will pay everybody in the country $300 for about 2 weeks. But to cut it back so not everybody gets it, so it might last 3 or 4 weeks or 5 weeks or maybe even to the election, Trump says states have to put up 25%. Well, the states have no money. They're broke. So that's going nowhere. And plus it drains the FEMA emergency fund of all of its money just as we're going into hurricane season and wildfire season. Brilliant, right? Number one. Number two, he says it would prevent evictions. As I said, this is the only one that was actually an executive order, and it was ordering HUD and HHS to look into whether it's possible to do this. Extending student loan relief from his campaign email. No, he has directed the Department of Education to look into whether it's possible. And with the payroll tax cuts, again, no, it's not being put into place. He is directing the Treasury Department to stop collecting your payroll taxes, but you still owe them. So you'll see a 6% increase in your paycheck from now until the end of the year. And then at the end of the year, you owe all that money. And Trump says, and Steve Mnuchin on TV this weekend on Fox News told Chris Wallace, well, if Trump gets reelected, he will make that permanent. But if he doesn't get reelected, you're going to have to pay back that money. Does this make sense to you? I mean, this is, in my mind, this is just another giant grift. This is just another scam. And meanwhile, our schools are in chaos. Testing is in chaos. Our elections are under attack. 250,000 Americans will be dead by Election Day.
Thom Hartmann Program.
5 million are already sick, and Mitch McConnell and the Republicans in the Senate have gone on vacation for the summer. Really? Your thoughts? And welcome back. Mike in Lomita, California. Hey, Mike, what's up? Thanks for listening to KPFK.
Hey, Tom. Sounds like Trump is trying to bribe us with our own money the same way he ran his businesses. Anyway,
yeah.
I just wanted to report the end of the week stats from Friday, reporting USA's standing in the world in terms of per capita deaths from COVID-19. And
okay,
the
where are
best
you getting these,
nations. This is from a German business statistics site called Statista. And they're a little bit different today, of course, because it's been updated. But as of Friday, the best nation in the world so far was Burundi, followed by Botswana, Vietnam, Uganda, and Rwanda. So we have 5 what Trump would call S-hole countries doing the best. Meanwhile, the United States, out of 152 nations listed, is at number 144, with a total of 489 deaths per million, which is pretty bad. There are some that are doing worse, but it's worth noting. You've mentioned before that South Korea had its first confirmed diagnosis January 20, same as the United States. However, their total is in the neighborhood of less than 6 deaths per million. So fewer than 6 in South Korea, and we're pushing 500. So I think that slogan for the Trump 2020 campaign could easily be "Death to America." now that we are 144th out of 152, one of the worst nations in the world in terms of deaths.
That is absolutely astonishing. I just checked out their website. This looks fascinating, Mike.
Yeah, and you don't find it.
STATISTA.com.
And this is something I don't hear being reported in the press for some reason. I know they're allergic to talking about anything that happens outside the U.S. or outside of celebrity entertainment culture, but you would think somebody would consider this a matter of importance in an election year.
Yeah, you would think so. Cases and deaths by country. Wow, this is the statistics on this are just astonishing. The USA is way ahead of everybody with 5.1 million cases, Brazil 3 million, India 2.2 million, Russia 800,000, and it's like, whoa. You scrolled at Germany. Where'd it go? Hang on just a second here. Germany only has 200,000 cases. France has 197,000 cases. We have 5 million, right? Just to say it again. Israel has 83,000 cases. Sweden has 82,000. Of course, these are smaller countries than us, but, this is, China. There's China. Oh, no, that's Ghana, 40,000. Yeah, it's go ahead.
Really interesting comparison is in Scandinavia. In Sweden, where they did the free-range herd immunity approach, 566 deaths per million. Across the Skagerrak in Denmark, where they use proper public health measures, only 106 per million. So more than five times
as high.
Difference.
Yeah, amazing. Thank you, Mike. Good to hear from you. I appreciate the call. We'll be right back. It's coming up on 20 minutes past the hour. Stick around. The Hartmann, our podcast, Hartmann.com. Hi, Thom Hartmann here. In my new book, The Hidden History of Monopolies, How Big Business Destroyed the American Dream, I'll be taking you from the birth of America as a revolt against monopoly, remember the Boston Tea Party, to the largely successful efforts of both Presidents Theodore and Franklin Roosevelt and other like-minded leaders to constrain corporations' monopolistic urges, to the massive changes in the rules of business starting during the Reagan Revolution that have brought us into the cancer stage of capitalism. In the foreword by Ralph Nader, he says, "This is the most important dynamic book on the cancers of monopoly by giant corporations written in our generation." End quote. It's the fourth in my Hidden History series, available where all fine books are sold. And don't forget, democracy is not a spectator sport. Democracy starts with you. Tag, you're it. Welcome back. This is just crazy. You know what Donald Trump is doing. Every single one of the four things that he claims he did by executive order, he didn't actually do. And in the process, he's also, kneecapping Social Security. But I mean, this is just extraordinary. And then Steve Mnuchin on Fox News, this is exactly what he said. This is our Treasury Secretary, the guy who threw thousands of people out of their homes during the foreclosure crisis back when he was a banker in California. Now he's in charge of all our money and basically doing the same thing. He says it's a payroll tax suspension, not a payroll tax cut. He said, well, the president, that's what Chris Wallace said, it's payroll tax suspension. And Mnuchin says, well, the president wanted to do a payroll tax cut, but we could do the payroll tax deferral. And he's going to the American people and telling them that when he's reelected, he'll push through legislation to forgive that. So in essence, it'll turn into a payroll tax cut. And then Chris Wallace says, well, what about cutting Social Security and Medicare? You're stopping the payroll tax is what funds Social Security and Medicare. And Mnuchin says, well, there would be an automatic contribution from the general fund to those trust funds. You would just have to transfer from the general fund. We'll deal with the budget deficit when we get the economy back to where it was before. Now, let me make this very, very clear to you. What the Republicans have been doing, this game that the Republicans have playing goes back to 1977 when Jude Wanniski published a piece in the Wall Street Journal suggesting the two Santa Claus strategy. He said for years and years and years, ever since the Great Depression, ever since FDR, the Democrats have been the party of Santa Claus. They gave Americans unemployment benefits, the Democrats. They gave Americans Medicare. They gave Americans Social Security. They gave Americans workplace safety standards. The Democrats gave Americans food safety standards. The Democrats gave Americans drug safety standards. The Democrats basically, gave Americans all this stuff, and the Republicans said no at every stage. I mean, even no to seatbelts. Remember that in the 70s? No to seatbelts. I mean, the Republicans were always the party of no. So Judah Wanniski says the Republicans need to figure out how to be a Santa Claus because Americans like to vote for Santa Claus, and they also need to figure out how to force the Democrats to shoot Santa Claus. And their main Santa Claus is Social Security and Medicare. So how do you do that? Well, it turns out, as Judah Wanniski suggested, what Republicans should do is become the tax cut Santa Claus. When they have power, when there's a Republican in the White House, cut taxes like there's no tomorrow. Run that budget deficit up by trillions of dollars. And then as soon as a Democrat comes into the White House, start screaming about the budget deficit. Now, in the second hour of this program today, I'm going to go through in detail exactly what Donald Trump is right now setting up to throw America into a worse depression than the Great Depression, starting the day after Joe Biden is declared the winner in the election, or the day after he's sworn in, one or the other. It'll be up to Trump when he wants to pull the switch. But he is going to throw America into a mind-boggling depression, and I will get into all the details of that in the next hour. But with regard to this is, Steve Mnuchin just said, we're going to do the two Santa Claus theory. And, the second part of it, you cut taxes, then you scream about the budget deficit, and then in order to fix the budget deficit, you cut social spending after you've cut taxes on billionaires. So here, Mnuchin says, first of all, we're not going to have a protected fund for Social Security anymore. It's going to be paid out of the general fund, in other words, out of regular taxes. So we're going to convert Social Security and Medicare into welfare programs, number one, so we can cut them. And number two, when, if Trump gets reelected, if Republicans hold on to power, then we are going to start screaming about the budget deficit. Now, we've just moved Social Security into the general fund, and now the general fund is in deficit because of tax cuts. So how are we going to solve that problem? Well, we're going to cut Social Security. And here's exactly what he said. He said, you just have to transfer Social Security to the general fund. We'll deal with the budget deficit when we get the economy back to where it was before. Well, how do Republicans deal with budget deficits? By cutting social programs like Social Security. I mean, Reagan did that back in 1983. He made Social Security income taxable. He changed the formula by which Social Security is calculated. So every year since 1983, people on Social Security, inflation adjusted, get a little less money. I mean, actually, it goes up, but it's less than inflation. And so, it's functionally less. And then, this is just going on and on and on. Meanwhile, Trump is trying to open all the schools. Right? Marco Rubio just came out and said, the good news is, he said, any setting in which people interact will lead to infections. The good news is these infected students are at very low risk for complications. Actually, nearly 100,000 children in the United States tested positive for COVID in the last 2 weeks of July. In Lake Tahoe, Corley Howard, a father of a 10-year-old, is begging the local city council not to let more tourists into the town because his 10-year-old son, Mason, is in the hospital with COVID. He has inflammation of the heart, lungs, brain, and digestive system, along with fever, vomiting, and body pain. Healthy, not obese, 10-year-old.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
In Lake Tahoe, for God's sake. He began vomiting on July 28th and ended up in the hospital 4 days later. Our book club book for today is Talk Radio's America by Brian Rosenwald, subtitled How an Industry Took Over a Political Party That Then Took Over the United States. This is from the introduction. August 1, 1988 marked the beginning of the long road to President Donald Trump. But even political junkies took little notice of the fateful events that unfolded that day as a failed disc jockey and former Kansas City Royals executive named Rush Hudson Limbaugh III made his national radio debut. Only a small audience tuned in. So poorly commemorated was the moment that we don't even know how many stations broadcast day one of Limbaugh's syndicated program. Limbaugh claims the show began on 56 affiliates, while other counts range from 57 and 87. From the beginning, the show was brash, entertaining, controversial, and boundary-pushing. Before Limbaugh, this sort of programming did not exist outside major cities. In 1983, there were just 59 talk radio stations nationwide, and the program on many of those stations consisted of advice shows, staged interviews, and caller-driven discussions of everything from neighborhood schools to abominable snowmen. Most talk radio programming focused on local concerns, and most of the industry's stars, such as Larry King and Sally Jesse Raphael, had left-of-center views but rarely shared them. At the time of Limbaugh's national debut, talk radio had negligible political impact. In talk radio hotbeds such as Boston, hosts might influence local and statewide policy debates, especially on visceral issues such as seatbelt laws. But talk radio was not a partisan force, and it had no role in national politics. In fact, the wall-to-wall conservative political talk stations that dominate the AM airwaves today were impossible until 1987, thanks to a regulation called the Fairness Doctrine. That year, however, the Federal Communications Commission eliminated the policy, which required broadcasters of opinionated programming on controversial issues to offer an array of viewpoints. In this more permissive environment, Limbaugh would go on to revolutionize the radio business. In doing so, he helped unintentionally to spawn a major new political player. Within a decade, the broadcast format he inaugurated aired on more than 1,000 stations and kept millions company as they commuted, worked, and shouted back at their radios. It took just a few years before conservative talk radio began to influence national politics and public policy. That influence only grew throughout the decades as the business changed. Over the course of the 1990s and early 2000s, the number of nationally syndicated talk shows rose dramatically, and the content of talk radio programs became increasingly political and conservative. Liberal pundits and some scholars agree on the broad outlines of the story. Conservative station executives, conspiring with their Republican allies, built a format modeled on Limbaugh's program, and thousands of Limbaugh wannabes cropped up all over the country. Executives, hosts, and politicians turned talk radio into an appendage of the Republican Party, using the platform to get Republicans elected and advance the party's agenda. The success of talk radio led to the development of partisan and ideological cable news networks, and some hosts complemented their radio shows with primetime cable programs. Eventually, this content found a home in the new digital sphere, with equally strident cheerleaders proliferating on blogs and other online publications. This narrative makes sense, especially to liberals. After all, many conservative media executives and their corporate political action committees donate to Republican candidates, and most hosts champion conservative candidates and causes. But this narrative is wrong. In reality, the story of talk radio's emergence as a popular conservative format and the impact it had on American politics weaves together two, But this narrative is wrong. In reality, the story of talk radio's emergence as a popular conservative format and the impact it had on American politics weaves together two distinct, complex tales. Neither has anything to do with the conspiracy to create a media servant of the Republican Party. The first describes how talk radio spread across America, in the process saving AM radio from financial ruin. Limbaugh had no intention of affecting elections or legislation, and no inkling that he could. Nor did any of his early successors. The executives who gave these hosts a chance also had no interest in political outcomes. Hosts and their bosses were in business. They wanted to captivate listeners and make money, and they discovered, essentially by accident, that conservative political talk in the mouth of an entertaining personality achieved this. Conservative hosts had strong opinions, but their primary goal was, and still is, financial gain. And it is because they realized financial gain that more and more stations invested in their style and content while divesting from competing formats. The second story concerns talk radio's transformation after 1995 into an almost entirely conservative and doctrinaire medium that eventually spawned successors in other media, took over the Republican Party, and reshaped it in hosts' and listeners' image. Limbaugh was a great innovator, but he didn't change American media and politics all at once or on his own. In conservative talk radio's early days, hosts shared stations with liberal talkers and apolitical programs. There was not an immediate sense that conservative radio was the future either. But gradually, its success snowballed thanks to trial and error in the radio business, regulatory changes, political events, happenstance, and most importantly, listener behavior. Hosts also got a boost from marginalized conservative Republican politicians who realized that talk radio would enable them to circumnavigate the mainstream media, and deliver their message directly to voters. The book, Talk Radio's America.
On this week's Science Revolution, is a drug maker sitting on a possible COVID-19 cure just due to greed? Dr. Stephen Enstrop, Chief Scientist for Polar Bears International, is here. Could polar bears be lost by 2100? Food and Water Watch's Tony Corbo dissects Cory Booker's bill to protect meat packers and why it's important. In Geeky Science, we'll talk about why the coronavirus vaccine may not work well for obese people and how that's a big problem. And lastly, Michelle Obama speaks about anxiety during the pandemic and what we can all do. Tune into the Science Revolution wherever fine podcasts are available. So Donald Trump doesn't have the time or bandwidth to actually do anything about the coronavirus, like implementing a nationwide testing program. We know now that, thanks to this extraordinary Vanity Fair article last week, that back in late March, Jared Kushner and some of the great brains in the White House had actually put together a national testing strategy and, mandating that the nation build up stockpiles of testing and test all across the country and all this kind of stuff. All that came to a screeching halt on April 7th when it was reported nationwide that African Americans and Hispanics were more likely to die from COVID-19 than were white people. And in the following 2 weeks, Kushner and Trump sat around and said, hey, this is killing Democrats. This is killing black people. This is killing Hispanics. This is killing poor people. This is killing the elderly who vote Social Security. Let's let it keep killing them. And so they literally deep sixed this entire program. So Trump has no program for America with regard to COVID-19. None. Zero. Other than going on TV regularly and saying, well, maybe you should take OxyContin. No, excuse me, hydroxychloroquine. Well, maybe he wants us to take both. I don't know. But I mean, it's just, this is how nutty this guy is. Or no, this is how evil this scheme is. And so he's doing none of that. But what is he actually doing? Well, it turns out one of the things he actually did, according to a 2018 interview with Governor Kristi Noem, she is the governor of South Dakota, he reached out and said, can you put my face on Mount Rushmore? Or he had one of his people. Right. Like the governor of South Dakota, that's where Mount Rushmore is, but it's a federal monument. I think he could do that himself, maybe. I don't know. One last story I wanted to share with you, or two last stories real quickly, and then I'll pick up your phone calls here. A lawmaker in Georgia, I saw this on CNN this morning. I retweeted 2 of her tweets. So if you go to my Twitter feed, you'll find them. A Georgia lawmaker says she wants to hear from students, teachers, and administrators with safety concerns. Her name is Beth Moore. She is a state legislator, a Democrat from Peachtree Corners, which is northeast suburban Atlanta. I may be wrong on that, but we lived there for, I think 18 years. Maybe it was 13 years, whatever. We lived there for a while. And she's gotten hundreds of emails from teachers in Georgia, basically outing this ongoing the disaster that's going on. One teacher said that a colleague of hers has COVID, was diagnosed with COVID, but is feeling a week ago, but is feeling better today, so she's going to go to work because she needs the paycheck. And this woman has to work with this person who has COVID, and she's a little freaked out. Okay, meanwhile, some reports from overseas. I just want to quickly drop these for you, and then I'll pick up your calls. New Zealand. New Zealand, of course, has a woman, Jacinda Ardern, as their prime minister. And they reported, the Ministry of Health reported, this is yesterday, this is from Getty News, reported no new COVID cases in New Zealand. Not only no new cases in New Zealand yesterday, no new cases the day before, or the day before, or the day before, or the week before, or the month before, or the month before that. It's been 100 days. That's over 3 months since New Zealand has had one single new indigenous case, locally transmitted case of COVID. They've had a few come in on airplanes and they isolate them, but they haven't had, it's been 100 days since a COVID case was found locally from an unknown source. The total number of active cases in the entire country of New Zealand, 23. The other headline is from Bloomberg, and it kind of reports itself. There's a major outbreak of COVID and deaths, a spike in deaths in Australia. Now, keep in mind, we're averaging over 1,000 deaths a day. We had one day last week where we had over 2,000 deaths nationwide, and we're averaging around 50,000 new cases a day in the United States. So 2,000 deaths a day in the United States. Well, Australia had its deadliest day on July 30th. I'm reading from the story, from the article. Australia had its deadliest day in the coronavirus pandemic with 19 fatalities. We have 1,000. They had 19. The number of new infections climbed by 322. That's about what we get in Oregon every day. About between 200 and 300 new cases, sometimes 400. The new record of fatalities, 19 people, eclipses the previous high of 17. Right. And then, meanwhile, one last story. I promise this will be the last one, and I'll pick up your phone calls. And we can continue this conversation for we still have 2.5 hours. But 55%, this is from MarketWatch.com, the headline, 55% of coronavirus patients still have neurological problems 3 months later. I saw Chris Cuomo on TV during his handoff to Don Lemon one night. This was 2-3 weeks ago. And Don was like, how you doing? Because he had COVID. And he said, I'm still not 100%. He said, my brain is still foggy. Well, apparently this may be very long term. I mean, we don't know. We've only had the virus for a few months. But they're saying among these, I'll just read from the article by Nicole Lynn Pess. While lung scarring, heart, and kidney damage may result from COVID-19, doctors and researchers are starting to clock the potential long-term impact of the virus on the brain. Confusion and difficulty concentrating, also called brain fog, as well as headaches, extreme fatigue, mood changes, insomnia, and a loss of taste or smell. Then they did this pretty exhaustive analysis of people who have recovered from COVID. 1 in 5 young adults under 34 was not back to their usual health. That's 20%, up to 3 weeks after testing positive. 35% of surveyed U.S. adults overall have not returned to the normal state of health. Now, a new study of COVID-19 patients published in Lancet this week finds that 55% of them are still displaying such neurological symptoms during follow-up visits 3 months later. And then they put them on brain scans. And they said that on the scans, the brains of the COVID patients showed structural changes that correlated with memory loss and smell loss. In other words, parts of the brain are actually being destroyed or damaged by this virus. And then they add, that's not exclusive to adults. Oh, Mike Pence, Marco Rubio this morning tweeting, kids, not very many of them get sick. Well, this is from the Journal of the American Medical Association's Neurology magazine or publication. Children with multi-system inflammatory syndrome. This is what that 10-year-old has, where dad is saying, please don't let more tourists come. These children develop neurological manifestations such as headaches, muscle weakness, confusion, and disorientation. They looked at a group of children with this in the UK. Half of them, quote, these children develop neurological manifestations such as headaches, muscle weakness, confusion, and disorientation. While half the kids recovered, the other half continue to show symptoms, including muscle weakness so severe that they need a wheelchair. University College of London warned about the potential brain damage epidemic caused by COVID-19 in the journal Brain last month. The study examined COVID patients treated in London in April and May and found 10 out of 43 cases of temporary brain dysfunction and delirium, 12 cases of brain inflammation, 8 cases of strokes, 8 cases of nerve damage. That's like, nearly half of them. No, it's actually more than half of them. Dr. Mark Zandi was quoted saying, quote, we have an epidemic on a large scale of brain damage linked to the pandemic, perhaps similar to the encephalitis lethargica outbreak in the 1920s after the 1918 flu pandemic. There was a jump in neurological and psychiatric problems worldwide for years after the 1918 flu pandemic because it was so serious. When you almost die, it alters your body. That's the bottom line here. The medical director of Mount Sinai's Center for Post-COVID Care in New York told MarketWatch that he's been seeing patients with extreme fatigue and difficulty concentrating for months after they purportedly recovered from the virus. He says, quote, their ability to work, their contribution to the workforce, to the domestic product is going to be reduced. And then Chris Cuomo on CNN said, quote, I've got an onset of clinical depression, which is not sadness. People keep saying to me, don't be sad. I'm not sad. I'm depressed. It's different. I can't control it. Stay away from this disease. What Donald Trump and his administration and Republicans like Marco Rubio, oh, you can send the kids back to school. They don't get that terribly sick that often. Well, most people who get polio don't get paralyzed either. Do we want this around?
Listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
I promise. Back with your calls right after this. We'll be right back. And welcome back. Pauline in Los Angeles. Hey, Pauline, thanks for listening to KPFK. What's on your mind today?
Hi there. About 2 ideas. One would be, because of what's happening with the post office, I think that blue states, especially blue states with big economies like California, New York, Washington, Illinois, need to start to collaborate on maybe forming some type of an election observance operation, and maybe even invite international countries like Canada or the EU to observe, especially in the battleground states, in the anticipation that we may have like a failed and chaos, even a violent election process, because obviously Trump is willing to go there. And who knows what will happen, because his people, his supporters, they're kind of they feel unleashed and they're going to do what they're going to do. So especially if we saw things like what happened in Michigan with, them showing up at the court, at the Capitol with guns and stuff, obviously people are going to be intimidated. And if we don't have mail service, obviously, I think it would be fair to call the elections a failed election. And we need to have people need to start thinking about what to do and how to call that and consider that, a valid call. And then in after that point, what would happen?
Well, before you move on, Pauline, the Democratic Party has already hired, I don't know the number, but my understanding is hundreds at least, of lawyers and enlisted thousands of volunteers around the country who are going to be doing what you said. They're going to be monitoring elections. Of course, the Republican Party has done the same thing, and they're going to be challenging every single vote.
Exactly.
But I think that every polling place in the country, at the very least, should have a drop box out front so that people can take a mail-in ballot and drop it off without having to run it through the post office.
But what if they don't get their mail-in ballot, though? Because obviously right now they're putting it into action. He's fired all these people. They're slowing down the mail. People aren't even going to get their medication. So we don't really know how this is going. We've got how many more days? Like 3 months or something. So I think
it's going to start in a month or so.
Right. So that's why they're starting now. So we really don't. I think we need to anticipate the worst, is my opinion, and maybe you're right. Maybe that'll be enough. But my point is from that about the collaboration, especially with big blue state economies, is that the idea to start to form like maybe a state bank, and in which you would have an account where you would have an account that acquires the federal income tax, the citizens' federal income tax. And instead of people just sending off a check to the U.S. Treasury, they write a check out to this account that's, let's say, the Bank of California, for the purpose of, the U.S. Treasury income,
No, I get where you're going, and forgive the interruption, but we've just got 15 seconds. That's probably already going to happen. Employers, Trump can order the Treasury to stop collecting Social Security payments, FICA taxes, but employers can continue to pay them. And I'm guessing, because this is going to be fully due at the end of the year, that most employers are simply going to ignore this and continue deducting FICA taxes and continue depositing them.
We need to send them to the tax. We need to send them to the state, though, not the U.S., because he's just going to withhold the state's funds. So we need to send them to the state. And then
I don't know that the states have the legal authority to take federal money and use it. I love the way you're thinking, Pauline. I just don't think that's going to be the silver bullet. The Hidden History of the Supreme Court tells the story of Nixon and Reagan's committing treason to steal the White House. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Ronald in Land O'Lakes, Florida. Hey, Ronald, what's up?
Hey, Tom. I was just thinking about some things you said earlier, which were the truth. The Trump administration is looking for every conceivable way that they can to bankrupt this country and then eliminate Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. Now, a lot of us...
And the Republican Party, by the way, let's be very clear about this, has been on this crusade since 1935 when Social Security was passed, and since 1960, whatever it was, I think it was 67, that Medicare was passed, and Medicaid. And they continue to. I mean, they're quite upfront about it, although their methods are typically a little underhanded. Back to you, Ronald.
Yeah, well, he seems to be looking for at least 3 different ways that he can accomplish this and stop paying out Social Security, Medicare, and all that. And I see it. I've seen it. I grew up in Washington, D.C., and I watched a lot of things. And I've read most of your books, so I know you're on top of it. I can't figure out why more politicians aren't doing more to cut it off before he can get anything going.
I think that what he's trying to do is not going to work. He can't suspend the payroll, the FICA tax. He can't suspend it. He can only order the Treasury Department not to aggressively collect the money. He can't stop employers from sending the money in. I'm guessing the vast majority of employers will completely ignore Trump's it's purely a suggestion, right? As an employer, I can tell you, we've got a couple of people on payroll, right? We've got 2 full-time employees and a couple of part-time employees. And we will continue to deduct FICA taxes and send them to the Treasury Department. And the Treasury Department will continue to accept them. They just won't enforce. In other words, for a company that is failing to pay, they won't go after that company. So, employers are going to continue to put this money in there because they know that this isn't an actual tax holiday. This is just a postponement of the need to pay the tax. So, I don't think this is going to work, Ronald. I absolutely get what you're saying, and I totally agree with you. They're going to do absolutely everything they can to destroy Medicare and Social Security because they hate those programs, because they are driven by, the libertarian billionaires who don't want to pay taxes that will support, average working people. But I get that. Len in Woodmere, New York. Hey, Len, what's up?
I'm actually driving from New York to Florida, and I noticed that people now are wearing masks, and they don't stop people coming into Florida anymore because they're not trying to stop COVID. But there are two things that he said Trump did.
Yeah, Len, I'm going to put you on hold here. Len's on line 3, Joyce, because your phone just disintegrated. You must have hit a bad cell there. We'll try it again in a minute. Austin, and by the way, offer one. We ask people just to offer one thought rather than 2 or 3 because it's not fair to other people who are on hold. Austin in Evanston, Illinois. Hey, Austin, what's on your mind?
Hey, how are you doing? I've just been so concerned with everything going on. I think that the American people deserve better than to have a person like this who seems to value more of an oligarchy structure rather than a democracy and caring about, their people.
Amen. And hopefully we'll get one in November.
Yeah, absolutely. But my thoughts are, my question, is what do you think about these executive orders that this president has been putting through? We've seen this president, increase military action, and increase, I think it was deployment, and I forgot it was Iraq or where it was, but
right.
He's been increasing this deployment.
Right, and then he cut back the forces in Syria to abandon the Kurds, so that because Erdogan threatened his hotel in Turkey, and right. And the Kurds are being slaughtered as we speak. There's famine going on in northern Syria and northwestern Syria, or excuse me, southwestern Syria, and and not to mention Yemen. A lot of this hasn't actually been executive orders. He's the commander in chief, so he can move troops around and do whatever he wants all around the world. He's doing that. The same thing with, moving our troops out of Germany and into Poland, because Poland's Prime Minister Duda just stole another election, and he's a right winger following in the path of Viktor Orban. But what was the specific question, Austin?
Yeah. So in terms of what he is doing with the coronavirus and with executive order, is he actually? Because I think you said he wasn't, but he's not.
Yeah, he's using, increasingly, when you read these articles about this in the press, you will see that they're referring to them as executive actions rather than executive orders. An executive order is a legal term for a document that the president drafts that, orders something to happen that is within the purview of his powers. I'm pretty sure that he used an executive order, for example, to order the Defense Department to give money to the contractors to build the wall on the southern border. And, that's being litigated right now in the courts. It'll get to the Supreme Court after the election. He'll probably lose that, but it'll be after the election. This was John Yoo's strategy that he went to the White House 2 weeks ago and shared with Donald Trump. He said, you can do any old damn thing you want. He said, Obama created DACA with an executive order. It didn't require Congress. And you can create things with executive orders, even if they're not legal, even if they're not constitutional. It'll take a year for it to get litigated and struck down. And in the meantime, you get the credit from that. You get the benefit. You get the praise. You get the love. You get the reelected. And all of
his supporters will believe him that he's somehow helping him. Yeah,
exactly, which is exactly what's happening right now. I'm getting fundraising emails from him saying, I got you the Social Security cut, payroll cut. I got you the $400 a week. I got you the student loan and eviction deferrals. And none of it is true. Zero of it is true. Yet he's raising money off it right now as if it were true. And a lot of people, who aren't in danger of eviction, they won't know that it's not true. They're not drawing unemployment checks. They're on Social Security or they've got some income. They're not going to know that it's not true. It's mind-boggling. This is Abraham Lincoln's. You can fool some of the people all of the time. And Trump is going after the sum of the people. S-O-M-E, not S-U-M. And that's what he calls his base.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are Raycon Earbuds. Stay at home with better sound. More info at buyraycon.com/Tom. Omega XL, which according to clinical research helps joints. More info at omegaxl.com/Tom. CB Distillery, CBD for sleeping. More info at cbdistillery.com, code TOM. The Clean Phone Pro, phone sanitizer and charger. More info at thenewdealshop.com. Keeps hair loss treatment. More info at keeps.com/Tom. And Teeth, Smarter Pet Dental Health. For more info, teeth.com, code TOM.
We say fight back!
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Unsettling Truths, the Ongoing Dehumanizing Legacy of the Doctrine of Discovery by Mark Charles and Soon Chan Ra. This is from Chapter 1. You cannot discover lands that are already inhabited. I, Mark, said this almost under my breath as I walked past a line of men dressed as Spanish sailors from the 1490s. I was in front of Union Station in Washington, D.C., near the massive statue of Christopher Columbus overlooking the United States Capitol. Every Columbus Day, there's an official ceremony in this plaza honoring Columbus as the discoverer of America. I had stumbled upon this ceremony by accident the year prior. There were a few non-natives holding signs and protesting the ceremony, but nothing very disruptive. I went back the following year primarily out of curiosity. I wasn't intending to protest, nor did I want to make a scene. As I walked up behind the statue and approached the group of men dressed as Spanish sailors, the words just came out of my mouth. You cannot discover lands already inhabited. As I walked further down the line, I said it again, this time a little louder. You cannot discover lands already inhabited. As I continued walking, I came to the front of the line where a group of men dressed in suits were standing. I repeated myself, making sure they could hear me. You cannot discover lands already inhabited. Suck it up, was the reply I heard as I kept walking. By this time, I'd walked around the statue and reached the front where a small stage had been erected and chairs set up for people to watch the ceremony. It hadn't started yet, but more than half the audience was seated waiting for it to begin. So I stopped near the center, turned toward the crowd, and in a calm but loud voice, I said to the people, you cannot discover lands already inhabited. That process is known as stealing, conquering, or colonizing. The fact that America calls what Columbus did discovery reveals the implicit racial bias of the country, that Native Americans are not fully human. Quickly, one of the white men dressed in a suit walked over and interrupted me. You are not welcome here, he said as he grabbed my arm and began walking me away. I attempted to explain the inappropriateness of both celebrating this holiday as well as hosting this ceremony, but instead of engaging in conversation, he threatened me with arrest and escorted me from the area. As I walked away from the gathering, I was amused at his words and the irony of their context. A white man participating in a public ceremony honoring Christopher Columbus as the discoverer of America, telling a native man he was not welcome in that space. How did a flawed assumption about the place of the indigenous population in U.S. society become normative? How are assumptions so deeply ingrained in the American psyche and imagination that dysfunctional and oppressive actions emerge? How did a dysfunctional idea and worldview form that allows for the displacement of native bodies? One of the explanations for the formation of this dysfunctional worldview is the doctrine of discovery. The doctrine of discovery is a set of legal principles that govern the European colonizing powers, particularly during the administration of indigenous land, regarding the administration. It is the primary legal precedent that still controls native affairs and rights, and international law formulated in the 15th and 16th centuries. From a theological perspective, the legal and political role of the doctrine of discovery is rooted in a dysfunctional theological imagination that shaped the European colonial settler worldview. The doctrine emerged from a series of 15th century papal bulls, which are official decrees by the Pope that carry the full weight of his ecclesiastical office. On June 18, 1452, Pope Nicholas V issued the papal bull Dum Diversus, which initiated the first set of documents that would compose the doctrine of discovery. The official decree of the Pope granted permission to King Alfonso V of Portugal, quote, to invade, search out, capture, vanquish, and subdue all Saracens, Muslims, and pagans whatsoever, and other enemies of Christ wheresoever placed, and the kingdoms, dukedoms, principalities, dominions, possessions, and all movable and immovable goods whatsoever, held and possessed by them, and to reduce their persons to perpetual slavery, and to apply and appropriate to himself and his successors the kingdoms, dukedoms, counties, principalities, dominions, possessions, and goods, and to convert them to his or their use and profit. End of quote from Pope Nicholas's papal bull of 1452. Dum Diversus would identify the Saracens, a common term for Muslims at the time, and pagans, essentially identifying any non-Christians as others, as those who could be targeted for, quote, perpetual slavery. The papal bull intentionally used language that identified those outside the European Christian world and enforced the Western theological imagination of non-Europeans as other. The Portuguese took these ecclesiastical statements to heart and perpetrated the slave trade from the African continent to the European and the American continents. As a Christian ruler, the King of Portugal would have power endowed from the church to take possession of the other as slave labor from the continent of Africa. The pagan African body was just another commodity to be taken for the pleasure and profit of the European Christian body, the one made most fully in the image of God. In the January of 1454, Pope Nicholas authored another bull. The book is Unsettling Truths by Charles and Ra.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. And just a heads up that I'm doing two book events. You know, normally when I show up in a town and, to do a book signing, the way that you hear what I have to say is by showing up at the bookstore. Well, these are different times. And it used to be if you didn't live in that town, you couldn't even get to the bookstore. We are doing virtual events, live virtual events, August 25th with Powell's here in Portland. David Corton, in fact, is going to be talking with me. And in Seattle, with Seattle Town Hall, again, a live virtual event. That'll be Friday, September 4th. So just a heads up on that. Ralph Nader wrote of this new book. It's called The Hidden History of Monopolies, How Big Business Destroyed the American Dream. He said, this is the most important dynamic book on the cancers of monopoly by giant corporations written in our generation. Ralph Nader. So anyway, just FYI. I wanted to talk to you about what I believe is the great crash coming. I've referenced this before on this program, but I think it deserves a little deeper drill down because I think this is a big deal. Congressman Ken Buck, for example, he's a Republican. He came out and he said the actual national debt of the United States is $30 trillion. And everybody's going, oh, I thought it was $20 trillion, $22 trillion, whatever it is. we're adding $2.7 trillion so far this year. Just in June, it was $864 billion was the deficit. That's what a normal year is. Keep in mind, when Reagan came into office and started this whole two Santa Claus starve the beast thing, the national debt was less than $1 trillion. By the time Reagan left office, it was almost $2.5 trillion. Now we're looking at $30 trillion, but what he's including in this, the number that he's including in this, is the $7 trillion that the Fed has created out of thin air to buy corporate bonds and corporate stocks to prop up the stock market. So if the Fed hadn't done that, then the stock market today, right now, would probably be in the neighborhood of where it was, in the weeks or months after the recovery began from the George W. Bush crash of 2008, the last Republican crash. Maybe 12,000, 15,000. I mean, it got all the way down to around 6,000. But, it'd probably be in the neighborhood of 12,000. And the only reason that it is where it has been for the last year or so, more or less, the mid-20s, the only reason it's there is because the Fed is buying stocks. And the only reason that anybody else is buying the stocks, and a lot of these corporations, like the airlines, for example, where, not only are they losing money hand over fist, but they're probably going to continue to do so for years to come. The only reason anybody's buying those stocks is, and in fact, for that matter, the only reason these companies can continue to operate is because they've been able to borrow money. They've been able to issue bonds, which is, debt instruments. Corporations issue a bond. United Airlines needs $1 billion. So they write $1 billion worth of IOUs. These IOUs are called bonds. But somebody has to buy those IOUs. And if nobody will buy them and thus loan that money to United Airlines stops operating. So the Fed is buying them right now. Now, the Fed is being run by a guy by the name of Jerome Powell. Jerome Powell is the first Fed chairman. He was put into place by Donald Trump. He's the first Fed chairman since, I think, the end of the Carter administration, basically in 40 years. I think we had one guy for 2 years who was, in fact, he was a Republican during a Democratic administration. And I want to say Bill Cohen, but I think he was the defense secretary. But in any case, we had one guy who was not an economist, but Jerome Powell is not an economist. So what's Jerome Powell's background? Well, he's worth tens of millions of dollars, $50 to $70 million. Or very wealthy, actually. We don't know exactly because, it's always, all these disclosure forms are in ranges, but he's very wealthy. How did he get rich? He was an investment banker. He's not an economist. His bachelor's degree is in political science. And then he got a law degree. He's a bankster. He was one of the managing directors. He was on the board of the Carlyle Group. Remember the Carlyle Group that George Herbert Walker Bush took a job as CEO of after he left the White House so that the defense industry could pay him back? Well, Jerome Powell was, that's how he got rich, is in the Carlyle Group. So he's a banker, not an economist. So you've got a banker running the Fed. The federal legislation from 1913 that created the Fed, nowhere in there does it say that the Fed may buy stocks or corporate bonds. It authorizes the Fed to buy federal treasuries. This is how the Fed regulates interest rates, is by buying and selling federal treasuries, changing the demand for treasuries, which changes the interest rate that has to be paid in order to get people to buy treasuries. But buying corporate bonds, no. But nonetheless, for the first time in the 107-year history of the Federal Reserve Bank, the Fed has been buying, they created $7 trillion out of thin air, which the Fed can do, right? If you look at the paper money in your pocket, it doesn't say, Treasury note. It doesn't, as it used to before 1913. It doesn't say U.S. money. It says Federal Reserve note. The Fed can create as much money as it wants. They've created $7 trillion and bought corporate bonds and corporate stocks with that. Not all of it, but a good chunk of it. So what happens on, say, November 10th or November 20th, when all the votes finally get counted, all the mail-in ballots and everything, and it is declared that Donald Trump won the election? What does Jerome Powell do? My theory is that at that point, Jerome Powell says, well, okay, the next guy in is probably going to replace me, although I'm not sure that they can do that. Well, that's a whole nother discussion. But Trump did with Janet Yellen. But in any case, he's probably going to say, or we know that he dances to the tune of Donald Trump. And what's Donald Trump's favorite game? Revenge. And who does Donald Trump hate? The majority of Americans who didn't vote for him. The millions of Americans who showed up in the streets the day after his inauguration, the women in particular, African Americans, and their allies who were out in the streets after George Floyd was murdered by 4 cops in Minneapolis. Who does Donald Trump hate? The majority of America. So what does he do? Well, after Joe Biden is declared president, declared the winner, Trump tells Powell, stop buying bonds and stocks. In fact, start selling your bonds and stocks. And what happens over the course of the next week? The Fed does that, and the stock market goes down to 6,000, which is where it was after the crash in 2008, after Bush's crash. In fact, it might even go lower than that because things are far worse than they were. This isn't just a problem of bad loans for home mortgages. This is systemic. This is the entire economy. Let's say the Dow goes to 5,000 or 4,000. I mean, a real 1929 style collapse, which, by the way, took 6 months to happen. And this will be, 6 months on from it getting really bad? And then all the media and all the press and Trump and everybody, they go out in front of the cameras and they say, well, the market has its own intelligence. And, Democrats were elected to take over the White House and the Senate and the House of Representatives. And therefore, the market knows that they're going to raise taxes and destroy the economy. So how do we deal with this? I think the way that we deal with this is by inoculating America to it, by telling everybody you know right now that Donald Trump is going to crash the economy if a Democrat is elected.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
So that the blame will be placed squarely where it belongs. Meanwhile, Bill Barr is talking about urban guerrilla warfare. More about that in a minute. package from a friend. What if it was the medication that you have to take? What if you were a diabetic and if you go one day without your insulin, you die? And it's coming by mail. We'll be right back. It's 20 minutes past the hour. Hi, Thom Hartmann here. In my new book, The Hidden History of Monopolies, How Big Business Destroyed the American Dream, I'll be taking you from the birth of America as a revolt against monopoly, remember the Boston Tea Party, to the largely successful efforts of both Presidents Theodore and Franklin Roosevelt and other like leaders to constrain corporations' monopolistic urges, to the massive So to slightly change subjects, although this is all, this all falls into the category of crimes against humanity, crimes against democracy, crimes against the United States of America. Bill Barr was interviewed over the weekend on Fox News' Life, Liberty, and Levin, Mark Levin's show, one of my colleagues in talk radio who now has a TV show on Fox News. And Bill Barr said this. He said, he's speaking of Black Lives Matter and the people who are out protesting the murder of George Floyd. And I quote, "They are a revolutionary group that is interested in some form of socialism, communism. They're essentially Bolsheviks. Their tactics are fascistic." He said, Black Lives Matter protests are a new form of urban guerrilla warfare. He went on to say, quote, "The way the guerrilla hides out among the people as a fish in the ocean, that what they do is essentially shielding themselves or shrouding themselves in First Amendment activity," says Barr. And then they go to the demonstrations, which are exercising First Amendment activity, and they insinuate themselves in there to shield themselves. That's where they swim, and what they do is they hijack these demonstrations and they provoke violence. Right, so what are the police doing about this? Well, this is where it gets a little chilling. This from Microsoft News, I think is what MSN stands for, MSN.com, Cadella Rahman writing the headline, "Police are monitoring Black Lives Matter protests with Ring doorbell data and drones." Now, just think about that for a minute. You have one of these doorbells, these Ring doorbells from Amazon. Well, it turns out the police are monitoring them. Amazon, again, reading this, Amazon's Ring doorbell cameras, drones, and a number of other surveillance technologies are being used by law enforcement agencies to monitor communities across the U.S., including Black Lives Matter protests. The Amazon Ring has video sharing partnerships with more than 1,300 law enforcement agencies across the United States. Now, there aren't even 1,300 cities in the United States. I mean, there's basically about 200, cities in the United States that are large enough to be called cities. But Amazon has cut deals with 1,300 law enforcement agencies, including the Los Angeles Police Department, the St. Louis Police Department, the Metro Louisville Police Department. And I say those because, in Louisville, you got the Breonna Taylor demonstrations. In L.A., it's been Black Lives Matter, and George Floyd. And in St. Louis, going all the way back to Michael Brown, right? And what this does is, quote, allows the department special access to Amazon Ring's Neighbors app, which provides users with crime and safety alerts. They are also using facial recognition. That's used by more than 350 law enforcement agencies. So they know when you leave your house, they know when you come back, they know what you look like when you leave the house and you come back. If there's a demonstration in front of your house, they can see it on your Ring doorbell camera. I am hoping that Amazon comes out with some sort of statement or declaration saying, we're going to do something about this. We don't think it's right. But, this is totally weird. If I had an Amazon Ring doorbell, and by the way, we don't know, there's other brands that compete with Amazon, and they may well have deals with the police departments too. It's just that Amazon has been more transparent about this. We've got a security camera at our house. It points at our front door rather than out from our front door, although it also has a view out from our front door, but it's, well, God only knows. Maybe it's being monitored by the police too. And then, I mentioned that I think that Trump is going to crash the economy. Sven Henrik, he's a guy who tweets mostly about economic stuff. He says, in the last 12 months, the Fed has injected, remember I told you the Fed has created $7 trillion of funny money and given it to corporations in the form of bonds and buying stock, which allows the executives to exercise their stock options and take millions and millions of dollars billions of dollars in compensation. Well, this guy, Sven Henrik, he writes, in the last 12 months, the Fed has injected the equivalent of nearly $10,000 per U.S. citizen into financial markets, and Congress is squabbling about $600 in unemployment checks. It's true. $7 trillion a year. If there's, there's 340 million of us, 7 trillion. Actually, that's almost $20,000 per citizen, isn't it? If I'm doing my math right. I think he divides 7 trillion by 340 million. And as you probably well know, I don't do math on the fly very, very well, but I think that would be about 20 grand. And that's how bad it will get if, after the election, when the press and everybody else says, yes, the Democrats won, they've retained control of the House, they've taken control of the Senate, Amy McGrath has replaced Mitch McConnell, knock wood, right? And Joe Biden is president, and therefore the economy is crashing. Well, the therefore is that Trump has ordered Jerome Powell and Steve Mnuchin to basically crash the economy. He's going to burn it down on his way out. He's doing exactly what my friend Armin Lehman saw Adolf Hitler doing at the end of the war. Burn it down on your way out.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
It's mind-boggling. How do you think it's going to play out? You think I'm wrong here? We'll be back.
Candidate. It was 8% for Hillary Clinton on the Democratic side. Trump went on to be elected president by 26% of eligible voters. The modern American oligarchs have largely stayed in power using three simple elements: explicit and overt racism, massive disinformation campaigns, and voter suppression. No ideas, no push for better schools, hospitals, airports, roads, or bridges, or reform of our health, energy, or financial systems. No promise of more and better jobs. None of these staples of past presidential campaigns can be found in pretty much any Republican advertising today. Instead, the public Republican message is all about race, or the subset of race, religion. Muslim stands in for brown Arab in GOP speak, and immigration, aka brown people from south of our border, and socialism. Meanwhile, Republican secretaries of state across the nation are vigorously purging voters from the rolls. Over 17 million, more than 10% of America's active voters in just the 2016-2018 period, according to NBC News. After the, after the 5 Republican appointees on the U.S. Supreme Court gutted the Voting Rights Act in 2013, 14 GOP-controlled states moved within a year, some within days.
Hi, Thom Hartmann here. In my new book, The Hidden History of Monopolies, How Big Business Destroyed the American Dream, I'll be taking you from the birth of America as a revolt against monopoly, remember the Boston Tea Party, to the largely successful efforts of both Presidents Theodore and Franklin Roosevelt and other like-minded leaders to constrain corporations' monopolistic urges, to the massive changes in the rules of business starting during the Reagan Revolution that have brought us into the cancer stage of capitalism. In the foreword by Ralph Nader, he says, "This is the most important dynamic book on the cancers of monopoly by giant corporations written in our generation." End quote. It's the Hidden History of Monopolies, available where all fine books are sold. And don't forget, democracy is not a spectator sport. Democracy starts with you. Tag, you're it. And Franklin Roosevelt and other like-minded leaders to constrain corporations' monopolistic urges, to the massive changes in the rules of business starting during the Reagan Revolution that have brought us into the cancer stage of capitalism. In the foreword by Ralph Nader, he says, "This is the most important dynamic book on the cancers of monopoly by giant corporations written in our generation." End quote. It's the fourth in my Hidden History series, available where all fine books are sold. And don't forget, democracy is not a spectator sport. Democracy starts with you. Tag, you're it. Oh, welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. And let's see here. Eileen in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Hey, Eileen, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. Listen, I'm just wondering, since President Trump has said that he would reduce the tax or eliminate the tax, forgive the tax, however he said it, isn't that a form of... I'm sorry?
Suspend is the word. He's...
Okay, but he said he would pay it back, or you wouldn't have to pay it. So isn't that a form of bribery or buying a vote? And isn't that illegal?
I would think so. He said you don't have to pay it back if he gets reelected. I mean, that's what he said, and he said it on television. He said, if I get reelected, I'm paraphrasing, but more or less, he said, if I get reelected, then next year we will pass legislation to make that withholding, that pause, that suspension of collection of payroll taxes permanent. Which means he'll permanently gut Social Security and Medicare. Right now, he just proposes to temporarily gut it. But in fact, you're still going to owe that money. So yeah, I think that that's a naked bribe, and I think people are seeing that. And certainly there's a lot of Democrats who are calling it out. So I'm totally with you, Eileen, and well said. I mean, great point to make. Susan in Phoenix, Arizona. Hey, Susan, what's up?
Yeah, Tom, I was just thinking as you were talking about Trump collapsing the economy when he leaves, I understand, if I recall, don't the middle class tax cuts end on December 31st, 2020? So as we enter the new year and a Democratic elected everything, we're going to get blamed for the taxes going up.
Oh, I believe that you're absolutely right, Susan. I know that the middle class portion of that $1.5 trillion tax cut from 2 years ago, the part for the 83%, I think it was, for the top, 5% of Americans, that's permanent. But the part for average working Americans, that expired after a couple of years. And I don't recall if it was the end of 2020 or if you have specific information and know that for sure, I'll take your word for it. Because I know it was, within just a few years, that it was just, it was just something that they threw in so that they could say to average working people, yeah, we got your back, don't worry. But it was just a temporary thing. It's a scam, basically. And yeah.
Yeah, probably worth looking into. We have a bad.
I think so. Absolutely. Susan, thank you for the call. John in Jeffersonville, Ohio. Hey, John, what's up?
Good. Tom, I called Rob Portman's office earlier today, and I called the one in the federal government, and then I called the local office because I do live in Ohio, and I was asking for help, assistance from my representative, right? And when I finally actually got to talk to a person in the local office down in Cincinnati. I couldn't get to any place else, but I did get to talk to a person. And I explained to him my history is I'm the same age you are. I was born in March 15th of 51. I think you're just a little older than me, maybe. But you're
younger. I was born in May.
All right, rub it in. Okay, so
sorry, John.
When you were a kid, though, you remember kids, going around with polio, right?
Yeah, I didn't know anybody really well who had polio, but we all knew of somebody who had polio. Yeah.
Right. So I had polio, and I was paralyzed for a year from my waist down, and that is a virus. And I explained to the lady that was a virus. Okay. 5 years ago, I got human papillomavirus. I got cancer in my throat. That's a virus. Okay. Right. When coronavirus came out, when that one came, when it started, I started hearing it on the world stage and all. March the 11th, I retired from work, and I have not gotten out of my house. Hello?
Same here. Yeah, I mean, Louise and I go out to take walks, and we'll drive the car to a store that will drop things in our in the hatchback of our car. But right. That's it. Yeah, go ahead, John.
Okay. But here's the thing, it just blew my mind what she said, okay? Because I told her, I said, look, I have all my medications sent to me by the mail. I cannot go out. I could. But I'm not, with my history of viruses, not going to happen. Mm-hmm. Third time's a charm.
Plus you're over 60.
Yeah, 69. So anyway, so here's the thing. You know what she told me? She said, well, you could just have them delivered to CVS or pick them up at CVS pharmacy.
Brilliant.
Blew me away.
Yeah. I mean, this is the thing.
Everybody needs to vote. Vote. If you just support Bernie Sanders,
and in the meantime,
have the intensity to vote.
Yes, and in the meantime, start raising hell with your elected representatives. John, thank you for the call. I'm sorry to hear about your situation. You might want to talk to your doctor about getting your prescriptions phoned in 2 weeks early. I know a lot of, with my stuff, I know they tend to do it like, in the last week on the assumption that it'll get, filled and all that. And for that matter, I'm guessing, the drugstores will start paying attention to this. But that they should. I mean, this is just nuts. Jeff in Portland. Hey, Jeff, what's on your mind?
Hey, Tom. I was calling because I agree with you about the Trump wanting to burn it all down, and I think that just highlights how the VP pick is going to matter so much, not just for winning but governing in the aftermath. Right. James Carville said we should be in no hurry. Biden should be in no hurry to pick his running mate. Reagan didn't choose Bush until right before the convention in 1980. And
right. Well, the convention is next Wednesday. It's a week from this week. It's a week from Wednesday, isn't it?
I think it's the 17th. So yeah, it's getting close. But and Reagan, let's give him credit. He was an outsider with extremist views, and he chose Bush Sr., who was an establishment centrist. And in the past, we've done the same thing. JFK chose LBJ. Obama did the same thing, choosing Biden to balance the ticket. You don't want an establishment centrist, two establishment centrists like we had with Hillary and Kaine in 2016. So, I think we should be staying very vocal until the choice is made. I think Karen Bass and Elizabeth Warren are the top two progressives running. But, Kamala Harris has just done a bill with AOC, the Climate Equity Act, and she has progressive tendencies. So, any of those three, maybe in that order, would give us a strong ticket to rally around and to govern with. So I really think we need to keep the progressive pressure on until he makes that choice. What do you
I agree. What I'm hearing is that it's down to Kamala Harris versus Susan Rice. And
that's the one. Rice is the one.
If it's Susan Rice, I will enthusiastically, support that ticket. But I would much rather see Kamala Harris. If these actually are the two choices, Kamala Harris has basically reinvented herself as a progressive ever since the primaries. And Susan Rice has, to the best of my knowledge, never run for anything. So that's a huge,
and
danger signal to me.
She's an establishment centrist, just like Biden is. So I mean,
of course.
we made the mistake in 2016 of letting, once Bernie conceded, the progressives were told to shut up and just fall in line, and that's how Hillary felt comfortable enough to choose someone so similar to herself. I really think we can't let that history repeat itself.
Well, we need to say everything we can, to the Democratic Party and to the superdelegates and the delegates and who are going into the convention and whatnot. But really, it's not going to be up to them even. It's not going to be up to us. This is up to Joe Biden, but he is responding to public pressure. And I agree with you. I think Karen Bass is one of the most spectacular politicians in America. And I've really only learned about her in the last year. I mean, I've known about her for a while. She's been the head of the Congressional Black Caucus, but I didn't realize how deep her progressive roots are.
The Guardian.
She is really solid. And she is so dignified. The other thing about Karen Bass, she comes across with such dignity. She's talk about being presidential, because I think whoever he picks as vice president is going to be somebody who's probably going to be running on the Democratic ticket for president in 4 years. And I'm just very impressed by her. But I think Kamala Harris has that potential too. Susan Rice, in my mind, is a big unknown. But like I said, Joe Biden could pick a lamp post, and I will vote for them. He could pick a can of tomato soup, and I would vote. Pick your an Andy Warhol picture. I'm there.
To Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Anything is better than a fascist and a militaristic fascist in Trump and a Christian fascist in Pence. And welcome back. Johnny in Galveston, Texas. Hey, Johnny, thanks for watching Free Speech. What's up?
Good afternoon, Tom. I have technical questions in regards to the Dropbox I hear about all the time. First of all, I'm not sure what people are referring to. Are they saying the Dropbox at the post office or the Dropbox at a voting location? And if there's a Dropbox at a voting location for people with their mail-in ballots that they prefer to drop off in person, is there a mechanism by which, when they drop it in the box, they can enter the code, some kind of a serial code on the outside of their envelope that pertains to their voting, to them specifically, and they get a paper receipt, so there's a paper trail? Or is it just an empty box with a lock on it that we hope Republican operatives don't steal some in the dead of night?
It depends on the state, Johnny, and that's the problem. Every state runs their elections however they want. This is, the 10th Amendment in action. And so here in Oregon, which is an all vote by mail state, we have, you can put your ballot in the mailbox, which is what I always do, or you can drive, and this was used, by the way, more prior to, I think it was 3 or 4 years ago. I'm not sure exactly when it happened, but the state legislature changed our vote by mail thing, so you no longer had to put stamps on your ballot. I remember I used to have to, it took 2 stamps to mail in a ballot in Oregon. And if you didn't do the 2 stamps, you were in trouble if you just put 1 stamp. And so the state legislature changed that and said, we'll pay for the postage. But, you know, you could drop it in the mailbox, or the state sets up, and frankly, I'm pretty sure it's the state setting these up. I don't think it's just Multnomah County where I live, you know, Portland. But they were setting up drop boxes that are sort of like mailboxes, you know, the postal mailboxes. They're big, they're heavy, they're bolted to the concrete, you know, they're or fastened in a way that you can't easily steal them. You can't get inside them, you can't interfere with them. And people would drive up and drop their ballots in those drop boxes. And those were principally for people who were trying to vote, you know, in the 2 or 3 days just before the election, when you weren't sure that your ballot would actually make it through the mail. Those drop boxes are taking on added urgency now. All the states, the 6 states that do all mail-in voting, or maybe it's 5 states, they all have some variation on this. And that's what they're referring to when they say drop boxes. Other states that are expecting large numbers of absentee ballots, which typically entirely come through the mail, are talking about putting together or legislating to put into place drop boxes like we have here in Oregon, where you can drop your ballot off. But not every state is doing it. In fact, I don't even think a majority of states are doing it. And it goes state by state. And I'm sorry, Johnny, I don't have a list here in front of me of which states are doing what. So I can't tell you what the situation is there in Texas, where you live. But if you call your Secretary of State's office, they should be able to tell you, or your county clerk, you know, there in Texas. I don't know the name of the county that you live in, but, you know, they should be able to tell you. But the bottom line is, this is the sort of thing that H.R. 1, the first piece of legislation that Nancy Pelosi and the Democrats passed out of the House of Representatives when they took over back in January of 2019. This was the first piece of legislation that was passed. And it funded things like this. I don't know specifically it funded drop boxes, but it gave the states enough billions of dollars that they certainly could do drop boxes. And they could strengthen their voting systems, and they could protect the electronic infrastructure of their voting systems, and they could print more ballots to accommodate vote by mail. We've got this situation right now in Puerto Rico where there's not enough ballots because the state didn't have enough money to print the ballots because they underestimated, presumably because they underestimated how many people wanted to vote this time. This isn't a primary. Latest hidden history books on monopoly and oligarchy, wherever fine books are found. Hi, Thom Hartmann here. In my new book, The Hidden History of Monopolies, How Big Business Destroyed the American Dream, I'll be taking you from the birth of America as a revolt against monopoly, remember the Boston Tea Party, to the largely successful efforts of both Presidents Theodore and Franklin Roosevelt and other like-minded leaders to constrain corporations' monopolistic urges, to the massive changes in the rules of business starting during the Reagan Revolution that have brought us into the cancer stage of capitalism. In the foreword by Ralph Nader, he says, "This is the most important dynamic book on the cancers of monopoly by giant corporations written in our generation." End quote. It's the 4th in my Hidden History series, available where all fine books are sold. And don't forget, democracy is not a spectator sport. Democracy starts with you. Tag, you're it. Here with Plexiter. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you, and John in West Allis, Wisconsin. Hey, John, what's on your mind?
Well, I believe that the so-called Social Security holiday is not just attempting to bribe the American worker. It's a huge, big corporation giveaway. At 6.2% of the salaries paid out by these big corporations, they're getting billions and billions and billions in welfare from the federal government. It's
at least until the end of the year. And that's why I don't think that these corporations are going to collect it, or are going to stop collecting this money. And that's why I think they're not going to stop sending this money to the federal government, because they don't want the nightmare of having, yes, it would be a no-interest loan from the federal government to big corporations with payroll, and they may set that money aside and use it for other things between now and the end of the year if they want to, because, hell, it's a no-interest loan. But it does have to be paid at the end of the year, John.
Well, that's only, of course, if Dump doesn't get reelected. Or, I mean, if he gets reelected.
Well, even if he does get reelected, it's going to take an act of Congress to suspend that, and that's only going to happen if the Republicans take control of the House of Representatives. And I think I can guarantee you, John, that's not going to happen.
Hopefully, you're right.
Yeah. So Trump can make his promises all day long, but there are some political realities here that you have to deal with. Thank you for the call, John. Len in Woodmere, New York. Hey, Len, what's up?
Hi. So Trump last week said when he was caught without the masks in New Jersey that it was a peaceful protest. Marry that with his remarks about the fact that he said he was a wartime president, and we can reasonably argue that he is a wartime president and he is on the side of the virus. But what to do now about the post office is what they did with Andrew Johnson soon before the election. Impeach him again. Impeach him over the post office. There's enough information now to start on impeachment.
Yeah. Well, I think that there are numerous things that he has done and said, since the last impeachment. Well, certainly even before that, for which they could impeach him. I'm pretty sure, Len, that the Democrats are not going to do this because they're afraid that impeaching him again will simply activate his base. I'm with you. I think
the base would be the people wanting to vote.
Oh, I know. I don't give a damn about his base. I mean, I don't think Democrats should be worried about his base. It's shrinking. He's got 96% approval among the Republicans, but the number of people who identify as Republicans has gone from the high 30s to the high 20s in the last 6 months, and it's continuing to shrink.
Everybody's got to know what he's doing to the post office.
Yeah, I'm with you, Len. I'm with you, and I'm doing the best I can to tell everybody. Dave in Federal Way, Washington. Hey, Dave, what's up?
Hey, not too much, Tom. Hey, I'm going to try to say this without sounding like a conspiracy nut or insulting anybody, okay? Like, for instance, Malcolm Nance is now sounding like you. I don't know if you're the one that influenced him or not, but Malcolm Nance is, when he talks about election interference, is including Russia, MBS, MBZ, Israel, all the other players. He's lumping them all together in an election.
Well, it's Seth Abramson wrote the book. I mean, let's give credit where credit is due. I know Malcolm. We've talked in back channel a little bit over the last month or so. He's a good guy. He's got a great book out. He's been a guest on this program. I have a lot of respect for him. But the guy who really did the digging on this and exposed it and laid it all out on this program in his book, Proof of Conspiracy, is Seth Abramson.
Right. And Michael Evanina, Trump's appointee, he just gave a briefing saying China appears to be helping Biden. They seem to prefer Biden, right? I disagree.
Well, those are two different things, and Dave, and that's a really important distinction. What the intelligence agency said is that China and Iran would prefer no longer having Trump. But that Russia would prefer having Trump, but Russia is taking active measures to help reelect Trump. China and Iran are not taking active measures to help reelect Trump. They simply, have in various ways said that they would prefer him. That's a night and day difference. I'd love to have 3 Teslas in my garage, but I don't have even one. What somebody's preference is versus what somebody's actively doing is night and day. But, the Trump administration is trying to compare them as if they're the same thing. They're not.
Well, of course they are, and that's kind of my main point, okay? Trump uses, like, you remember when this bombing happened in Lebanon, or this explosion happened in Lebanon. See, Trump's got me doing it. He automatically cherry-picked the intel out to benefit him by implying a conspiracy. Now, as a former intel guy myself, stuff like that, the possibility of it being a terrorist attack has to be articulated, but we give like a percentage, like, you know, what do we think? I mean, what does the analysis show? What is the probability? Well, Trump picks it out, right? And he's eager. He is eager to do war, to be a real.
I don't think he took that from intelligence, Dave. I think he just pulled it out of his backside.
Well, my point is I think on his way out, I think we might be in the antebellum period of World War III right now. We're in the prelude. Trump has already perhaps gone too far. I mean, he's letting his ambitions, possibly, set the world.
You think he might be triggering World War III?
Yes, and there may not be any way for Biden to stop it.
Wow. Okay, we'll need to talk about that more later on in the week. Thanks, Dave.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are Raycon Earbuds. Stay at home with better sound. More info at buyraycon.com/Tom. Omega XL, which according to clinical research helps joints. More info at omegaxl.com/Tom. CB Distillery, CBD for sleeping. More info at cbdistillery.com, code Tom. The Clean Phone Pro, phone sanitizer and charger. More info at thenewdealshop.com. Keeps hair loss treatment. More info at keeps.com/Tom. And Teeth, Smarter Pet Dental Health. For more info, teeth.com, code Tom.
We say fight back!
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Unsettling Truths, the ongoing dehumanizing legacy of the doctrine of discovery by Mark Charles and Soon Chan Ra. This is from chapter 1. You cannot discover lands that are already inhabited. I, Mark, said this almost under my breath as I walked past a line of men dressed as Spanish sailors from the 1490s. I was in front of Union Station in Washington, D.C., near the massive statue of Christopher Columbus overlooking the United States Capitol. Every Columbus Day, there's an official ceremony in this plaza honoring Columbus as the discoverer of America. I had stumbled upon this ceremony by accident the year prior. There were a few non-natives holding signs and protesting the ceremony, but nothing very disruptive. I went back the following year primarily out of curiosity. I wasn't intending to protest, nor did I want to make a scene. As I walked up behind the statue and approached the group of men dressed as Spanish sailors, the words just came out of my mouth. You cannot discover lands already inhabited. As I walked further down the line, I said it again, this time a little louder. You cannot discover lands already inhabited. As I continued walking, I came to the front of the line where a group of men dressed in suits were standing. I repeated myself, making sure they could hear me. You cannot discover lands already inhabited. Suck it up, was the reply I heard as I kept walking. By this time, I'd walked around the statue and reached the front where a small stage had been erected and chairs set up for people to watch the ceremony. It hadn't started yet, but more than half the audience was seated waiting for it to begin. So I stopped near the center, turned toward the crowd, and in a calm but loud voice I said to the people, you cannot discover lands already inhabited. That process is known as stealing, conquering, or colonizing. The fact that America calls what Columbus did discovery reveals the implicit racial bias of the country, that Native Americans are not fully human. Quickly, one of the white men dressed in a suit walked over and interrupted me. "You are not welcome here," he said as he grabbed my arm and began walking me away. I attempted to explain the inappropriateness of both celebrating this holiday as well as hosting this ceremony, but instead of engaging in conversation, he threatened me with arrest and escorted me from the area. As I walked away from the gathering, I was amused at his words and the irony of their context. A white man participating in a public ceremony honoring Christopher Columbus as the discoverer of America, telling a native man he was not welcome in that space. How did a flawed assumption about the place of the indigenous population in U.S. society become normative? How are assumptions so deeply ingrained in the American psyche and imagination that dysfunctional and oppressive actions emerge? How did a dysfunctional idea and worldview form that allows for the displacement of native bodies? One of the explanations for the formation of this dysfunctional worldview is the doctrine of discovery. The doctrine of discovery is a set of legal principles that governed the European colonizing powers, particularly during the administration of indigenous land, regarding the administration. It is the primary legal precedent that still controls native affairs and rights, and international law formulated in the 15th and 16th centuries. From a theological perspective, the legal and political role of the doctrine of discovery is rooted in a dysfunctional theological imagination that shaped the European colonial settler worldview. The doctrine emerged from a series of 15th century papal bulls, which are official decrees by the Pope that carry the full weight of his ecclesiastical office. On June 18, 1452, Pope Nicholas V issued the papal bull Dum Diversus, which initiated the first set of documents that would compose the doctrine of discovery. The official decree of the Pope granted permission to King Alfonso V of Portugal, quote, to invade, search out, capture, vanquish, and subdue all Saracens, Muslims, and pagans whatsoever, and other enemies of Christ wheresoever placed, and the kingdoms, dukedoms, principalities, dominions, possessions, and all movable and immovable goods whatsoever, held and possessed by them, and to reduce their persons to perpetual slavery, and to apply and appropriate to himself and his successors the kingdoms, dukedoms, counties, principalities, dominions, possessions, and goods, and to convert them to his or their use and profit. End of quote from Pope Nicholas's papal bull of 1452. Dum Diversus would identify the Saracens, a common term for Muslims at the time, and pagans, essentially identifying any non-Christians as others, as those who could be targeted for, quote, perpetual slavery. The papal bull intentionally used language that identified those outside the European Christian world and enforced the Western theological imagination of non-Europeans as other. The Portuguese took these ecclesiastical statements to heart and perpetrated the slave trade from the African continent to the European and the American continents. As a Christian ruler, the King of Portugal would have power endowed from the church to take possession of the other as slave labor from the continent of Africa. The pagan African body was just another commodity to be taken for the pleasure and profit of the European Christian body, the one made most fully in the image of God. In the January of 1454, Pope Nicholas authored another bull. The book is Unsettling Truths by Charles and Ra.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. And there's a new website out there. It's called Vote From Home 2020. I'm looking at it right now. And how it works, COVID-19 has brought America to a halt, and with it almost all in-person voter mobilization efforts. And so, they're doing all kinds of cool stuff. In fact, let's check in with one of the people involved with this effort. Ben Tyson is the co-founder of VoteFromHome2020.org. And Ben, welcome to the program. Tell us about Vote From Home 2020.
Well, thanks, Tom. It's great to be here with you today. I really appreciate it. Yeah, Vote From Home 2020 is kind of our grassroots response to both the dual factors of the pandemic this year and Donald Trump's ongoing efforts at voter suppression, trying to disenfranchise voters to keep himself in power, and our realization that we can mobilize activists and grassroots support across the country in order to keep him from doing that, keep him from using COVID-19 as the biggest tool of voter suppression that we've ever seen in our lifetimes.
So how?
So we are reaching out to voters in swing states. Particularly, we are targeting voters in North Carolina, Pennsylvania, and Michigan. These are three states that are battleground states, obviously, in the election. And if we flip these three states to vote Democratic in 2020, even if everything else stays the same, we'll manage to get 270 electoral votes and win. But these are three states that have historically very low rates of voting by mail. We see voting by mail as the key in order to make sure we have a safe election this year, so people can vote safely from home over a long period of time. We're getting out there early. We've already started sending text messages and making calls to voters in these three states to get them activated, get them signed up to vote by mail, and then we'll be sending them mail-in ballots directly with return postage prepaid, with the return envelope pre-addressed, so that they can get their mail-in ballot early and get it returned early so that their vote will be counted in the election.
So if people want to vote from home, at least in those three states, they can go to votefromhome2020.org. What about the other states?
Well, actually, anyone in any state can go to votefromhome2020.org/apply and click on their state and get access to find tools on how to register to vote by mail in those states. Our voter mobilization efforts and direct voter contact are just the ones that are focused on those three states. But anyone can go to votefromhome2020.org/apply to get information and help registering for a mail-in ballot wherever they live. Obviously, in some states, it's easier than in others. North Carolina, Michigan, and Pennsylvania are also three states we're targeting because they allow any voter in the state without needing an excuse to request a mail-in ballot, even though this is the first year for many of them in doing so on a widespread way.
What about people who live in Texas or New York, where you have to have a reason to get a mail-in ballot? And in Texas, in fact, I think you have to have a doctor write that reason.
Yeah, I mean, there are a number of ongoing court cases specifically challenging Texas's restrictions on voter registration for vote by mail. And in New York, I know there's still some ongoing discussion about expanding that for the general election. But in a lot of these states, I mean, it is true that something that is a hindrance to voters is not being able to request a mail-in ballot easier. New Hampshire is another state where you still require an excuse in order to request a mail-in ballot. And while there are legal challenges going on to those to try and get them overturned or lifted for the 2020 election, this is a broader fight than just actually that we're seeing in 2020. And the efforts to expand voting access is something that both predates the 2020 election and something that we're hoping to continue once this is wrapped up and we have a Democratic president in the White House.
It boggles my mind, Ben, is that there's, very few people dispute. I mean, you got crackpots around the fringes with their little lawsuits and things, but basically there's very few people disputing the powers of federal and state governments during a public health emergency. For example, the power to close restaurants and bars, or the power to require, to limit public gatherings, things like that. Very few people, no rational person is saying, oh, no, you can't do that. But even in a state that's theoretically controlled by Democrats, like New York State, they're not saying, because of the public health emergency, we're going to make it easy for people to vote by mail. What's going on in New York? What am I missing here? And why is this not, this state of emergency not being more broadly used by other states? Or is this something that's exclusive outside of New York to states controlled by Republicans who agree with Donald Trump, and apparently with you, Ben Tyson, that if everybody votes, more Democrats get elected and the Republicans suffer?
Well, we also have to remember that Donald Trump's whole fundamental premise to his existence and his electoral strategy and success is premised on this idea of restricting the number of people who can vote. That's also a big factor in why he won in 2016. And he believes that and knows that if everyone came out and voted for, in the general election, that he would lose. I mean, this is also why we have to remember that Hillary Clinton did win the popular vote in 2016, and the majority of this country voted for someone not named Donald Trump that year. That said, I mean,
same with Al Gore and Bush.
Exactly. So this is an ongoing problem that and kind of systemic to our country that we make it harder for people to vote and participate in our democracy just because it's actually a political tactic for one side of the aisle to help them stay in power. But going back to the issue of expanding vote by mail access in red or blue states, I mean, this is something that we have to remember is kind of an entrenched voting system, right? That people just aren't used to voting by mail, whether you live in Texas or New York. In a lot of these places, in places like Oregon and Colorado, there's a long history of voting by mail. People are used to it, and it's very accepted. But it takes a long time to transition and get people used to new voting systems. That's why with Vote from Home 2020, we're really focused on this component of it that's voter outreach and calling voters and texting them at multiple points along the process of voting to help walk them through it. Because, whether you're an election official trying to administer and institute a new way of voting or a voter, trying to, figure out what the new ways of voting are, it can be complicated. And so that's why we really need to focus on the voter mobilization aspects of expanding this as well.
We're talking with Ben Tyson. He's the co-founder of VoteFromHome2020.org. Ben, some months ago, Greg Palast had pointed out that about a third of ballots that are sent out here in Oregon don't ever get returned. That's because about a third of people who, are eligible to vote don't vote. In some states, it's as much as half. Over the weekend, he was tweeting that over 20% of Michigan people who had gotten absentee ballots, those ballots were not recorded. I don't know if he was talking about people just didn't vote and send them back, or if they were disqualified. But we are seeing in some states some fairly high percentage numbers for ballots being disqualified because people didn't sign the outside of the envelope, or because somebody challenged it, saying that their signature wasn't close enough to the one on their card, on their voter registration card. What's the situation with all this stuff?
Well, I think that there are some institutional changes that we can and need to fight for over the coming months. One of the biggest ones is fighting to extend the deadline where ballots can be accepted back at county clerks or local township officials, or it varies state by state, but wherever ballots are sent back to by voters, by changing the deadline so where it has to be postmarked by Election Day, not received by Election Day. You can actually cut down on those numbers of rejected ballots significantly.
Here in Oregon, though, Ben, our vote by mail ballots are, they come in a self-addressed stamped envelope. It's got postage already on it, and it doesn't get postmarked.
Well, and that's also one of the important things that you particularly have in Oregon there. That's the one success that we can fight for over the coming months is expanded drop boxes. Actually in Oregon, most people don't send their ballots back via mail. They put them in one of the drop boxes. I went to college up there, and I got to do that myself for a number of years.
I live here.
There you go. Well, so anyways, but the expanding drop boxes, changing the postmark deadline, and other simple local institutional changes like that are realistic steps that we can take in order to safeguard the elections and make voting by mail more accessible in the general election.
There you go. Ben Tyson, the co-founder of VoteFromHome2020.org. Check out that website. And, a great resource. Ben, thanks so much for dropping by.
Thanks for having me.
My pleasure. Great talking with you. We'll be right back.
Thom Hartmann Program.
VoteFromHome2020.org. VoteFromHome2020.org. We'll be right back. And welcome back. Kent in Klamath Falls, Oregon. Hey, Kent, thanks for watching us on YouTube. What's up?
I was just going to tell you were talking earlier about the Fed's bailout right now. But in 2008, they bailed out to the tune of $29 trillion. That's T as in Tom.
And, in 2008,
that was in 2008. James Felkerson, University of Missouri, Kansas City, wrote a paper in December 2011, working paper 6, 9, or 8, $29 trillion, a detailed look at the Fed's bailout by funding, facility, and recipient. But
right, and this was the result, by the way, of legislation that Bernie Sanders co-authored that, along with, I believe, Rand Paul, that required an audit of the Fed coming out of that event. And, you know, it was a one-year audit, but yeah, we found out that. And not only were they bailing out U.S. banks, they were bailing out U.S. billionaires individually. They were bailing out foreign banks. They were bailing out foreign hedge funds. They were bailing out foreign billionaires. They were bailing out corporations left and right. I was saying at the time in 2009 and 2010 that we would be in a Great Depression if the Fed wasn't supporting things. They are continuing to support things. What's your point, Kent?
The point is that a few weeks ago, July 2nd, Yanis Varoufakis gave a really good interview, and he told how this led into what we're going through now. And basically, he's just pointing out we are basically at war with oligarchs. And my thought that I want to leave you with is that the stimulus package that is being held up in Congress, I think the Republicans are just going to keep kicking the can down the road. Your last guest just talked about mail-in ballots, and I'm looking at, in the next few months, you're going to see a lot of people no longer having a mailing address. And it's just one part of the shotgun theory that they're using. They'll do anything to disrupt this election.
Yeah, they will burn this country down if they think that it's going to help them get reelected. I'm sorry, Kent?
I said I'll just let you think about that, but I think with a lot of it's going to be very hard.
No, I got it. I'll do it, Kent. Thank you very much for the call. Joe in Marshall, North Carolina. Hey, Joe, what's up?
Tom, at some point, do you think Trump, in exchange for immunity, will testify, and would that turn the Republican Party upside down, or what?
Testify against who about what?
Well, anything that he knows. He has a lot of info, and I think to avoid going to prison, he loves himself enough to, if anybody would do that, it would be him. And so that's just what I'm thinking. I think it's coming.
That's interesting.
And it's not all that far-fetched.
Yeah, I'd never even considered that. But yeah, essentially he's a coward, and if he gets cornered enough, I don't know. I suspect he's more of a go out and in a blaze of glory guy than a flip state's witness kind of guy. That he would do something, intentionally get COVID or something, something essentially suicidal. God only knows, though. I just it's hard to get inside this guy's mind. I've been reading Mary Trump's book, and it's scary. But Joe, it's possible. Who knows? Thank you for the call. It's coming up on 20 minutes past the hour here on the Thom Hartmann Program, the place where we dare to ask, is Walmart a person? And we dare to say, no, not a chance. We'll be right back. Daily rants and weekly op-eds at HartmannReport.com. It's free and there's no ads. HartmannReport.com. Hi, Thom Hartmann here. In my new book, The Hidden History of Monopolies, How Big Business Destroyed the American Dream, I'll be taking you from the birth of America as a revolt against monopoly, remember the Boston Tea Party, to the largely successful efforts of both Presidents Theodore and Franklin Roosevelt and other like-minded leaders to constrain corporations' monopolistic urges, to the massive changes in the rules of business starting during the Reagan Revolution that have brought us into the cancer stage of capitalism. In the foreword by Ralph Nader, he says, "This is the most important dynamic book on the cancers of monopoly by giant corporations written in our generation." End quote. It's the fourth in my Hidden History series, available where all fine books are sold. And don't forget, democracy is not a spectator sport. Democracy starts with you. Tag, you're it. Boy, what a day. Welcome back. Jeff in Arlington, Virginia. Hey, Jeff, what's up?
Hi, Tom. I'm calling with a possible solution for the impasse on the new stimulus bill. That's assuming that Trump's executive order is not implemented.
Well, even if it is, it doesn't matter. Trump's executive order is not, it does not suspend any student loan. It does not suspend any eviction. It does not add $400 to anybody's paycheck. And, whatever the fourth thing was, it doesn't do that either. I mean, it's a joke. It's a stunt.
Specifically, I wanted to focus on that extra money for the unemployed. The Democrats want $600 a week. The Republicans want to make it $200 a week, and that's one of the sticking points that's been holding the bill up. So I had an idea for a solution to that, which is to give people the $600 a week right up front, $10,000 in one shot, which is the equivalent of 4 months of those $600 a week payments. And that would accomplish three things. First, with one $10,000 check, people can pay off bills, pay off debts, and breathe a bit easier. Number two, it kills the incentive to not return to work. And then they can make a level-headed decision if they want to risk their health and go back to work, etc. And then finally, it kills the Republican argument against the payments.
So, Jeff, have you done the math on 10,000 times, 140 million people in the workforce?
I didn't, no.
Or actually, it would be 10,000 times, 40 million people who are drawing unemployment.
But it would be in the budget. If they're ready to pay $600 a week to all those people for 4 months, then they would be budgeted.
Yeah, but I'm thinking 40 million times 10,000, so you would add 4 zeros to 40 million. So that becomes 400 million. 4 billion, 40 billion, 400 billion. That's got to be $4 trillion. I'm terrible at doing math like this on the fly, but it seems like you're talking about $4 trillion.
It sounds scary.
Am I wrong?
How much did we just pay the last 4 months when we paid $600 a week? It's the same amount of money.
Yeah, that was a little over $1 trillion and a half. So maybe it's. Yeah, this is what Republicans are objecting to is, oh my God, you're going to run up the debt, and we always are supposed to scream about the debt. But I think giving people $10,000, there would be a huge shot to the. I mean, if Donald Trump wants to intervene in the negotiations, this is what he should propose, because if you gave everybody $10,000 right now and said, okay, you're good until the end of the year. A lot of people are going to spend that money right up front, and they're going to be buying things that would stimulate the economy, and theoretically that would help Trump tremendously. I mean, whether in reality, I don't know. But Jeff, interesting point. Thank you, Mark in Portland, Oregon. Hey, Mark, what's up?
Hey, Tom. I was just wondering about whether or not it's even constitutionally legal for Steve Mnuchin to determine that Social Security would go into a general trust fund. I mean. The Social Security Act.
No, it's not.
So he would not legally be able to do that, and I don't think that.
And that's why Trump's executive order does not include that. Mnuchin on Fox News over the weekend said, if Trump gets reelected, that's what we'll do. He said, but for right now, 100% of the money that you don't pay in Social Security taxes, in FICA taxes between now and the end of the year, you're going to have to pay on December 13th, or it's going to come due on December 13th. You're going to have to pay it by April 15th, by tax day.
Yeah. And I just a little bit of a spin on the whole, Ronald Reagan's 10 most terrifying words. I think the 10 most terrifying words from the new Biden administration would be, I'm the new president and I'm looking forward, not back.
Yeah, I'm with you. It's time to stop giving former presidents a pass. Mark, thank you for the call. And it's always Democratic presidents giving Republican criminal presidents a pass. Corky in Rochester, New York. Hey, Corky, what's up?
Hello, Tom. Yeah, I just don't understand people. Trump's a crook. Everything he says is a lie. He's going to do all this for you. He does absolutely nothing. Just like we were supposed to get a big tax break after the election. Right. He proposed before the election. Nothing came to
Well, if you were a billionaire, you did get a big tax break, Corky.
Yeah, but the little people.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing. I mean, it's this entire thing, and the fourth item was the payroll tax cuts, extending unemployment benefits, preventing evictions, extending student loan relief, and payroll tax cuts. Those are the four things that Trump emailed to me saying, this is what I did for you. And every single one is a lie. He asked HUD to look into whether they can prevent evictions. He asked the Department of Education to look into whether they can extend student loan relief. The unemployment benefits, he's taking money out of FEMA and offering it to the states, but they have to match it with 25%. And even if they don't have to match it, he's taking money out of FEMA. And it's hurricane season, and it's wildfire season, and he's going to exhaust FEMA, and it'll be exhausted in 2 to 3 weeks. I mean, there's not the money there, and the payroll tax cuts, again, is a scam. He's not actually cutting your payroll taxes. He's stopping collecting them for a few months, but then at the end of that time, you owe all that money. You're going to have to write a check for a couple $1,000 or whatever that percentage of your pay would be to the federal government. He's lying through his teeth again. I mean, it's mind-boggling. We'll be right back.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
It's some strange stuff going on out there. Have you heard about the Freedom to Breathe agency in the federal government?
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Stand Up, Struggle Forward by Sanyika Shakur. This is a book that was written back in the late 90s, but it's still very, very timely. This is from the second chapter titled Class Antagonisms Inside the Fundamental Contradiction of National Oppression. Having just passed the 19th and quickly approaching the 20th anniversary of the LA Rebellion, we should be reminded here of what Rodney King whimpered as he stood in front of a bank of microphones surrounded by class enemies and neo-colonial politicians. We should remember how he'd been dressed in that non-threatening cardigan sweater, white shirt, and black tie, how his hair had been tortured into submission by a jerry curl. We should reflect as well upon how timid and spooked he looked, and on how concerned and stern those who flanked him were as well. That was a Kodak moment. It was staged to foster an image of contrition and resignation, submission, a victim. Rodney King had been led to believe, through a bourgeois sense of reasoning, that the rebellion was really about him, that the reason new Africans and Mexicanos took to the streets of South Central was the result of his filmed beating. That, of course, is typical of mechanical bourgeois thinking. What it's not typical of, however, is someone from the hood. And this cuts both ways. No one in the hoods and barrios ever thought it was about Rodney King. We'd all seen the film over and over like everyone else, but that was par for the course. We'd always seen that, long before anybody caught it on tape. Actually, we'd experienced much more than that. Why, it's safe to say that the hoods had gone to war with each other in vicious waves of internal, intra-class combat for much less than that, though because of a general colonial mentality which prevents the challenging of bottom-up oppression, the same hood forces will not, in any systemic way, wage war on the pigs, or for freedom, land, and socialism. Rodney King alone and of his own accord would not have thought to hold a press conference to ask the asinine question in the form of a whimpering request, can't we just all get along? The fact of the matter is, we are getting along. New Africans and Mexicanos are getting along just fine. What we couldn't understand was why he was admonishing us for getting at the exploiters of our communities. The impression he gave with his handler's hands up his back like a ventriloquist troll was that a race riot was going on, as if we had all begun to kill each other or burn and rob each other's homes. His handlers compelled him to send up a false flag, a diversion. But you see, this was the very thing that exposed the class interests and reactionary politics of the Uncle Toms that had been designated to handle him, and by extension, us. Let's go back for a minute. Let's talk social development, aka history. There exists a fundamental contradiction in our lives that, like an elephant in the room, no one wants to acknowledge. As a consequence of the war waged upon various African nations by European powers, those of us captured and kidnapped were taken out of our own self-determining social developments and violently forced into Euro-American history. This is not simply a clever play on words. This is a reality. we lost the ability to control our own destiny. Read that again. From that time until now, the fundamental basic contradiction between the U.S. oppressor nation and our own oppressed and colonized nation has been the governing imperialist relationship, which is to say, us not being in control of the qualitative factors that determine our lives as a people, as a nation. Our tradition of struggle against this fundamental contradiction has taken many forms, some hidden or obscured, some open and hostile. But all of these have been open to resolve the fundamental contradiction and to regain our independence. While there have been some bona fide struggles to resolve the contradiction, there have also been reactionary neocolonial struggles waged by internal enemies loyal to the oppressor nation and culture that have tried time and time again to subvert and control our destiny for the benefit of the capitalists. They've come among us, always imposed from above, stirring up emotions and giving lip service to progress, equality, justice, and prosperity. These always within the colonial confines of the oppressor's arrangements, and none collectively ever materialize, because without a resolution of the fundamental contradiction, that is the freeing of our productive forces from U.S. imperialism and the governing of our own affairs, we'll remain a minority within the American system as opposed to a majority in our own, and subjected to the established bourgeois social contract, i.e. colonialism, neo and post. We can parade all through the empire with black congressmen, black mayors, black governors, black police chiefs, black Supreme Court justices, hell, even a black president. And absolutely nothing will alter the genocidal relationship that governs our national oppression here, because the blacks are part of the colonial apparatus. They have made a strategic alliance with the capitalist imperialists to act as go-betweens in our oppression and exploitation. This is a conscious class stand. The black petty bourgeois is not innocently confused, like, say, Mrs. Jackson across the street is, about our national oppression, about the existence and subjugation of New Africa. They are well-read, have traveled in our experience. They've just chosen sides against us and in favor of our historical enemies. And the sooner we recognize and internalize this, the better off we'll be. Black ain't nothing but a color. As a designation of our national identity, it has played out. It is a superficial understanding at best and a foolish and dangerous analysis at worst. We have no collective control over the qualitative factors which determine our lives. We do not, in other words, control our destiny, not as a people or a state. The book is Stand Up, Struggle Forward by Sanyika Shakur.
Hi, Thom Hartmann here. In my new book, The Hidden History of Monopolies, How Big Business Destroyed the American Dream, I'll be taking you from the birth of America as a revolt against monopoly, remember the Boston Tea Party, to the largely successful efforts of both Presidents Theodore and Franklin Roosevelt and other like-minded leaders to constrain corporations' monopolistic urges, to the massive changes in the rules of business starting during the Reagan Revolution that have brought us into the cancer stage of capitalism. In the foreword by Ralph Nader, he says, "This is the most important dynamic book on the cancers of monopoly by giant corporations written in our generation." End quote. It's the fourth in my Hidden History series, available where all fine books are sold. And don't forget, democracy is not a spectator sport. Democracy starts with you. Tag, you're it. Constrain corporations' monopolistic urges, to the massive changes in the rules of business starting during the Reagan Revolution that have brought us into the cancer stage of capitalism. In the foreword by Ralph Nader, he says, "This is the most important dynamic book on the cancers of monopoly by giant corporations written in our generation." End quote. It's the fourth in my Hidden History series, available where all fine books are sold. And don't forget, democracy is not a spectator sport. Democracy starts with you. Tag, you're it. So in our Geeky Science today, this is an amazing story, just amazing. You know, one of the things that for me was a giant, almost a spiritual revelation, a spiritual insight when I was a teenager, as I recall, maybe even younger than that, was when I learned that outside of hydrogen and helium, and arguably helium, but mostly hydrogen, which apparently the universe was filled with at the beginning, right? Outside of that, every other element has been created by being burned inside a star, by hydrogen burning itself into helium, and then basically merging nuclear fusion is what it's called. Taking a whole bunch of very light elements and jamming them together and coming up with a heavier element. And we know, literally every element, gold, copper, and we're able to watch stars explode or sometimes see stars and say, oh, well, that one's heavy in this particular element. But the one element that they've been really unable to exactly figure out which stars, how, and where, and when it's created is calcium. The stuff in our bones, our teeth. Look at your teeth in the mirror. Look at somebody else's teeth. What you're seeing is something that was made in a star. But what star and where and how? Nobody knew until just a few months ago. And the reason why was because an amateur astronomer, a fellow by the name of Joel Shepard, noticed a burst of light in a spiral galaxy called Messier 100. It's 55 million light years away, through his personal amateur telescope. And he spotted that there was a bright orange dot in this galaxy, which could be the beginning of a supernova, of a massive explosion of a star. And so he flagged this on the amateur astronomy bulletin boards, and it got picked up by professional astronomers. And in fact, Wynne Jacobson-Gillan, the author of this study, said observing supernova within hours of an explosion is the new it thing in our field right now. And what they found was that this supernova was blowing out, majority of what it was blowing out as a star exploded was calcium. And it turns out that this is, Jacobson-Gillan said, calcium-rich supernova produced just enough additional calcium in the explosion to provide an efficient means of emitting photons that in turn release heat. He said, nature chooses the path of least resistance, and calcium provides that path when enough of it is present in a supernova. This is supernova 2019 EHK. It emitted the most calcium ever observed in a supernova event. More than 70 scientists around the world collaborated on this. He said it wasn't just calcium rich, it was the richest of the rich. So, but we are literally, I think this was an old Joni Mitchell song line, we are star stuff, right? We are, everything you see around you came out of a star, out of a dying star, an exploding star. Isn't that amazing? Anyhow, our geeky science for the day. So, picking up your phone calls here, Julia in Auburn, Washington. Hey, Julia, what's on your mind today?
Yes, I have been doing some research on political ideology, and I can't find anything to combat neoliberalism. And I don't know what the great thinkers are thinking, because neoliberalism is going to kill our society. I mean, we're just
right.
trying.
The opposite of it, Julia, is called Keynesianism.
Well, we tried that, right? We did that, and
it worked.
And then the conservatives, I know, but the conservatives, took it down.
Right, so and we need to try it again. I mean, these are the cycles, basically. And another way to describe it would be big government, small government, caring government, ignoring, not uncaring government. Basically, when the government intervenes in the marketplace in a way that protects workers and funnels a substantial portion, not even the majority portion, but a substantial portion of industrial output into the pockets of workers, then the economy is healthy, the economy is stable, the economy grows steadily, worker incomes grow, the middle class grows and prospers and flowers. On the other hand, when you employ Reaganomics or neoliberalism, as you're calling it, or trickle-down economics or austerity economics, when you apply that, what you end up with is the rich get richer and richer and richer. You end up with Mark Zuckerberg being worth over $100 billion, Jeff Bezos over $100 billion. You get these centibillionaires, and average working people get screwed, and the poor get poorer and poorer, and working people see their incomes flat, as they have been since 1981, since Reaganomics started. Working people have not seen a pay raise ever since then. And the cost of living has certainly gone up in a lot of areas, particularly pharmaceuticals and healthcare. So the solution is to go back to Keynesianism, which is have government actually intervene and interfere in the marketplace. Because the more that government has pulled back from the marketplace during these 40 years, the more that has empowered and allowed giant corporations, monopolistic corporations. I mean, this is the essence of the book that I've got coming out in a couple of weeks, The Hidden History of American Monopolies. It has allowed them to basically eat our lunch. And other countries are not allowing this. You look at the countries of Europe, they will not let this happen. But the opposite of neoliberalism is Keynesianism, and we need to return to that. Julia, I got to move along, but thank you for the call. David in Spotsburg, New Jersey. Hey, David, what's up?
Hi. I've got a question. What the new Congress takes office January 3rd, and the president takes office January 20th. What happens if we only get a stopgap measure that goes to December? The new Congress steps in and puts in an extension for 3 or 4 months. What would happen during that time period? And the second thing is,
measure
I think
of what?
I know. In other words, the Heroes, a version of the Heroes Act.
Oh, if Congress passes the Heroes Act, I don't think the Heroes Act even lasts all the way to the end of the year. I know some of its provisions do, but I don't think all of it does.
Parts of it went to January 31st, and parts of it go to next March. But I think the unemployment piece went to January 31st. But I'm saying, let's say that you get a bill now, or you don't get a bill. Maybe this is what the Republicans are doing all along. What's going to happen when we get our new Congress on January 3rd, and the president doesn't leave to January 20th?
Well, anything Trump doesn't like, he can refuse to sign, or he can even veto, and then they'll have to wait for the new president.
So that those 3 weeks are going to be a disaster, or those 4 weeks.
Could be, may well be, yeah, and that's why, by the way. Well, I shouldn't just assert that's why Trump wants to try to resolve this before January 3rd. The presidential election, but yeah, there you go. David, thank you for the call. That's an interesting and important point to keep track of and keep on your mind. Larry in Los Angeles. Hey, Larry, what's up?
Hi. My main point is that the $7 trillion in the market support that Trump is giving is actually reparations to mostly rich white Americans. And this is happening again. It happens more and more as the Republicans become president. They crash the economy. The government then steps in and provides reparations to those people who own the stock market, and that's mostly rich white people. So this time around, for the first time, I think in my lifetime, the stock market started to crash. The government stepped in and saved all of those investors from having losses, and now some of them are actually gaining wealth during a recession, while everybody else is falling behind. And you can look at the PPP program. You can look at the bank interest that the Fed pays banks now. The banks don't pay the Fed anymore. The Fed. That's the reason why the banks didn't fail in this last recession. By the way, they didn't have any problem. They got through it nicely. And when you sit back and look at all these programs, the soybean support, the support to the coal mine owners, all of this is reparations to white people, and at the same time, the people who were enslaved by this country still have never received their reparations.
Yeah, not getting squat. Although the word reparations implies that you actually deserve something, and I don't see why rich white people deserve anything right now. At least,
well,
in terms of support from the government.
And I just heard a report that that in Britain, in England, they just finally finished paying the reparations to the slave owners for the slaves that they lost when slavery was ended. They just did that.
Well, they did that after the Civil War here in the United States, too. Slave owners were reimbursed, but the slaves never got their 40 acres of
reparations to white people, but no reparations to black people who were enslaved.
Yeah, absolutely spot on, Larry. Thank you.
Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
And it's high time. It's 45 minutes past the hour. We'll be back with more of your calls in just a moment. And welcome back. Brian in, is it Aliso Viejo, California? Am I saying that right?
Aliso Viejo, that's correct. I wanted to talk about, I've done a little bit of research at 270towin.com, and there are 8 Senate races that are going to come down to get out the vote, which anyone can participate in remotely with these phone banking sessions. And the reason, in my opinion, why it's so critical for the Democrats to pick up the 4 seats minimum that we need to take the majority of the Senate is so we can pass the critical environmental legislation that Mitch McConnell will never let through. And there's a great book, maybe you've heard of it, with regard to what we can do to help the environment. It's called The Last Hours of Ancient Sunlight, written by a man by the name of Thom Hartmann. This guy Thom, he really knows his stuff. You should consider having him on the show.
Right.
But we need to pass. I'm actually in the process of attempting to acquire the rights to Last Hours of Ancient Sunlight, the motion picture. So I hope I can have your blessing on that. But we need to pass a carbon tax. We need subsidies for ranchers for algae-based feed because cows produce methane when they chew, and we need to invest that in marine snow. So that there are 8 races that are close enough. Senate races where get out the vote is going to make the difference. Now, if I could list those on the air really quick, Tom. Sure. Personally, I am investing, spending, contributing, and going to phone bank for Amy McGrath. It's not the closest race, but she's gaining momentum, and we've got to get absolutely the most critical one. But there are 8. There's Alaska, Alabama, Colorado, Kansas, Kentucky, Maine, Montana, and South Carolina. And those are specifically ones where the presidential race is not that close. So people in these states, in my opinion, need to be getting their feet, knocking on doors, getting out the vote in person. There is no substitute. Phone banking is great. And everybody listening on the show right now needs to do 2 things. They need to buy the Last Hours of Ancient Sunlight today, not tomorrow. And they need to phone bank for these 8 Democratic senators, because they are close enough that getting out the vote is going to make the difference. And we need the Senate. I do not want my children to grow up in hell.
Yeah. By the way, Brian, the movie's been made. If you go to YouTube and put in Last Hours and my name, Leo DiCaprio made that movie. And it's a little 12-minute piece. And
it's short.
It lives on YouTube.
I guess that means I can't use the name. I'll have to name it something else. Yeah. I saw that. It's
but
great. It's the Permian Mass.
But I encourage you to make the movie. Brian, would you and thanks for the comments, although absolutely not necessary. Would you please list that name of states again real quickly? We've got about 15 seconds.
It's Alaska, Alabama, Colorado, Kansas, Kentucky, Maine, Montana, and South Carolina. There's a couple others that are close, but the presidential race is tighter in those. So I'd rather see people in Arizona, Georgia, and North Carolina, Michigan, and Texas campaign for Joe Biden. But these guys in these 8 states, they got to get out knocking on doors.
Yeah. Excellent point. And you said the website is 270towin.com?
270towin.com. Numbers 270.
Okay. I'm unfamiliar with that website. I'll go check it out I'll wait until I get off the air now. But Brian, thank you for the call. I appreciate it. And thanks for your kind words. We'll be, although again, as I said, they're not necessary. We'll be back. It's 10 minutes before the hour. We'll be shortly. Stick around. The hidden history of the war on voting tells how the GOP has been stealing elections for decades and will again this year unless we stop them. So I've got a new book out about monopolies. Ralph Nader wrote in the foreword, "This is the most important dynamic book on the cancers of monopoly by giant corporations written in our generation." And I will be doing live free book signings, although you have to get tickets for them. You can get the tickets at thomhartmann.com. But one with Powell's Bookstore here in Portland. David Corton will be joining me, the guy who wrote, When Corporations Rule the World. That's on August 25th at 5 o'clock Pacific time. And then at 6 o'clock Pacific time on Friday, the 4th of September, we're doing one with Town Hall Seattle. So you can find all the information over at our website. Just FYI, as they say. Sandra in Bennington, Nebraska. Hey, Sandra, what's up?
Hi, I just had a question. I was arguing with someone online the other day about the Trump $300, extra for unemployment, and supposedly $100 from the states if they could pay it. She was saying that that's on top of what the states already pay in unemployment. But
that's correct.
I wondered about that because an awful lot of people, they've already been on unemployment. They've used up what they were going to get, and so they have none of that anymore.
That's correct.
So,
if your unemployment benefits have expired, and during the Bush administration, they cut long-term unemployment from 2 years down to 1 year, and I think they gave states the ability to cut it even more, because I know that some states it's only 6 months. So if your unemployment benefits have expired, you don't get anything. And if you are drawing unemployment, you would get the extra $300 out of the FEMA funds, plus the $100 coming from your state, if your state chooses to participate. And by the way, it'll probably take most states 2 or 3 months to be able to process this money, because instead of taking money out of the Treasury and doing it the normal way, they're taking money out of FEMA, and it's a whole brand new thing that they're going to have to reprogram their computers and everything. And and frankly, I think it's just a I can't see any state doing it. Nobody's going to see any money in their paychecks. And I think over the next few weeks, as people notice that their paychecks are still, half of what they were, or less in some cases, because that $600 a week has gone away, people are going to figure out that Donald Trump has been lying to them, that he's just running another con, which is what he does for a living. This guy has been a con artist since he was a kid.
Yeah, that's
Sandra,
for sure.
thank you for the call. Yeah, and always good to fact check. Thank you very much. Bob in Naples, Florida. Hey, Bob, what's on your mind today?
Yes, I voted for Biden even if he picks Stephen correct. But the Republicans are using Kanye West to siphon the votes from Biden. I don't know if it's going to work, but
I don't think it's going to work. I think this is so cartoonish. The Republicans assume that African Americans will vote for any old African American, and it's just like, even one who is mentally ill. I mean, Kanye West is a very talented artist, and he's suffering from bipolar disorder, and you don't want him as president. And I just can't imagine large numbers of African Americans going, oh yeah, I can see some star-struck people just simply recognizing his name. But just because he's black, we're gonna vote for him instead of I don't think it's going to happen, Bob. And I think it's an insult to the intelligence of black people for Republicans to even try to make this happen. And Kanye West is obviously doing this now with official help from the GOP and from the Trump campaign, which speaks even more poorly of them. Bob, thank you for the call. Jordan in Albuquerque, New Mexico. Hey, Jordan, what's up?
Awesome. I want to speak for the black delegation. We are not voting for Kanye West. And my question for you arose when Benedict Donald appointed DeJoy at the USPS. If he is only appointing people that financially support him, what is the difference between us and Russia?
Well, increasingly that difference is getting smaller and smaller, and it's not just Russia; it's us and any authoritarian power. If you really want to see the formula, Google my name and Viktor Orban, or just the word Hungary should pop it up. I wrote a piece for Salon a while back. In fact, I retweeted it yesterday. A couple of months ago about the parallels, how authoritarian governments. Orban in 9 years took Hungary from being one of the most vibrant democracies in the European Union and a full member of NATO, from that into being a failed state, a one-man, strong-man dictatorship, essentially. And that's what Trump is doing. Jordan, did you say you're African American?
Correct, yes.
Do you think Do you think that any consequential fragment of the African American community is going to vote for Kanye West over Joe Biden?
As typical, what Trump does hurts Trump, and he'll still Republican voters. Those are Kanye supporters. That's what people don't understand.
Okay. So it's gonna backfire on him. Fascinating. Thank you, Jordan. Great to hear from you. Bill in St. Helens, Oregon. Bill, you got the last minute and a half. What's up?
Yeah, hi, Tom. There's nothing more sacred in this country than the vote, because it's literally the only way we can hold our elected officials accountable. And one party, as you mentioned a few moments ago, one party has actively suppressed the vote for over 2 decades now. Now, I follow Greg Palat.
4 decades.
Yeah, well, I'm just saying that I'm saying since 2000, it was so overt, it was undeniable.
Yeah.
2000 was a wholesale theft of the presidency by the Republicans. But that's not my point. My point is, I hear people giving lip service to us. I've written my representatives. I said, why aren't you doing anything? This is a crime against representative democracy. There's no greater crime going on in this country right now than this absolute attempt to overthrow the will of the people in every single election, and that's essentially what they're doing. And yet, CBS, ABC, NBC, MSNBC, lip service. I hear people talking about it in passing, and then we put someone like Brian Kemp in a governorship after clearly stealing an election. The man should be in prison, not in the governor's office. I don't understand what's going on in this country, Tom, that we can't talk about the crimes going on against our elections. I'm mind-boggled. I'm speechless.
Yeah, I am too, Bill. I am too. And I think that the Democrats need to be screaming a lot louder. And of course, every time they do, the Republicans come out and say, oh, they just want illegal immigrants to vote or some other BS like that. Bill, thank you for the call. It is outrageous. Thanks so much for being with us today. Remember, there is a lot you can do. And we've talked about a lot of it during this program. We can be active, even if we're housebound. So get out there, get active, tag you're it. Help make something happen. And try to lift somebody up today. Find somebody that you can just make them smile, okay? Or yourself. We'll see you tomorrow. Have a great afternoon. Be good to yourself and others.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.
These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are Raycon Earbuds. Stay at home with better sound. More info at buyraycon.com/Tom. Omega XL, which according to clinical research helps joints. More info at omegaxl.com/Tom. CB Distillery, CBD for sleeping. More info at cbdistillery.com, code TOM. The Clean Phone Pro, phone sanitizer and charger. More info at thenewdealshop.com. Keeps hair loss treatment. More info at keeps.com/Tom. And Teeth, Smarter Pet Dental Health. For more info, teeth.com, code TOM.
Hi, Thom Hartmann here. In my new book, The Hidden History of Monopolies, How Big Business Destroyed the American Dream, I'll be taking you from the birth of America as a revolt against monopoly, remember the Boston Tea Party, to the largely successful efforts of both Presidents Theodore and Franklin Roosevelt and other like-minded leaders to constrain corporations' monopolistic urges, to the massive changes in the rules of business starting during the Reagan Revolution that have brought us into the cancer stage of capitalism. In the foreword by Ralph Nader, he says, "This is the most important dynamic book on the cancers of monopoly by giant corporations written in our generation." End quote. It's the fourth in my Hidden History series, available where all fine books are sold. And don't forget, democracy is not a spectator sport. Democracy starts with you. Tag you're it.
We say fight back!